And then as soon as he comes on, I will happily cede the chair to him.
I just put us live on YouTube, just so everyone knows.
Oop, I actually see Nick is over here in the attendees. Where'd he go? He was here. Names are
There he
bouncing.
is.
Oop.
Hi,
Angela must have
folks.
grabbed him.
Hey, sorry about that. So, Rachel, that was your cue to be on the ball this evening. Yeah, I've been having problems the last day or two, which is frustrating. I hope we're going to make it tonight. But thank you for being patient and waiting. Everyone ready to go? All right. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Monday, July 13th, 2020 Town of Scarborough Planning Board meeting. If we could all rise quickly for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
United States of America, to the republic, and
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I'm going to do the roll call. Rachel Hendrickson,
Here.
Jennifer Ladd,
Here.
Roger Beely,
Here.
Rick Duperi,
here.
Rick Meinking,
Here.
Nick McGee, here. Robin Saunders.
Here.
Thank you. Show us all in attendance this evening. Next item of business is the approval of the minutes for June 1st and June 22nd. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Oh.
Yes, Robin.
I have some amendments to the minutes that are needed. For example, I was absent from the 22nd, but I was there on the 29th, and the minutes don't reflect that.
In the interest of getting a motion, I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is that for the June 1st or for the June 22nd?
For the June 1st.
Yeah, I have a motion to approve the
Second.
June 1st meeting.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All right, we're going to roll call. Rachel Hendrickson,
Yes.
Roger Beely,
Yeah. Yes.
Robin Saunders,
I wasn't there, so I'll, oh, yes, yes.
Jennifer Ladd.
Yes.
All right, Nick McGee, yes, thank you. Show that unanimous. Do I have a motion to approve the June 22nd meeting minutes?
Second.
I have a motion and a second in discussion. So Robin, and maybe Jay, maybe you can help advise on this, where we have, that meeting was split into two, and we have Robin that's attended part of it, not the second, the first half, but not the second half. Would it be wise here for her maybe just to abstain on the meeting minutes? Because technically it was a one meeting just with a continuance, so it's as if she had left halfway through.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if that's my echo or what. Haven't teased through that question before. So if it would work to abstain, I think that might make things easier. If we want to take additional time to discover what the
No, I think abstaining is probably the right thing to do here in this situation, Robin. Are there any other discussion for the minutes for June 22nd? No, okay. I'm gonna call out the roll. Rachel Hendrickson,
Yes.
Roger Beely,
Yes.
Jennifer Ladd.
Yes.
Thank you. Robin Saunders.
Abstain.
Thank you. McGee, yes. Show that 4-0 with one abstention. Next item on tonight's agenda is the planning board will conduct a public hearing to receive comment on the proposed amendments to chapter 405, section 9P of the zoning ordinance. Actually, Jay, before I kick over to that real quick, I just want to make the technical announcement that we do at the start of all of ours. I skipped over that part. Hold on one second. I'm going to pull up that little Jem. All right. This is just a general announcement. It's a remote meeting using Zoom. People can access these meetings by going to the planning board's webpage. And for viewing only, you can click on the YouTube link. If you wanted to attend the planning board meeting virtually and provide public comment at the meeting, please click on the link for Zoom. Board recommends written public comment prior to an upcoming meeting at this time, given the remote video conference meeting format. Directions can be found on the planning board's webpage. Attendees are muted and must raise a hand to be called on during public comment parts of the agenda. Please raise your hand only when it's time for public comment, not during an applicant's presentation or board deliberation. If the chair happens to drop off the meeting due to technical difficulties, the vice chair shall start running the meeting until the chair returns. All right, that out of the way. Jay, back over to you.
Yep, thank you. So let's see, this first item is a public hearing to consider amendments to Chapter 405, more specifically Section 9P of the performance standards. This proposal is coming to the board by way of the ordinance committee, who had received a number of requests to change the performance standards regarding the keeping of chickens, specifically to find a way to limit roosters in residential areas. The proposed language requires that all chickens be female, except in the RF or rural farming zone on lots of 80,000 square feet or more. This would allow rural Scarborough residents to have roosters while limiting residents that live in more densely populated areas of town from doing so. And so that's really quite a simple change, but certainly up for discussion. And as board members will recall, really what the board's action here is to provide an advisory opinion to council as this goes through the process. I should just make mention that council has conducted their first reading on the item, and so subsequent to this discussion, go back to council for a public hearing and a second reading.
Thank you, Jay. So we have opportunity for public comment this evening. If this is a topic you wanted to talk about, please use the raise my hand feature in the bottom corner of your screen. We'll call on you and give you about 3 minutes to say your piece if you're interested. All right, I don't see any public comment at this time, so I'm going to close public comment and turn it over to the board. Anyone here have any thoughts to offer on this topic? I don't see any, and I'm sorry, I'm scrolling through the pictures right now, so I don't want to intentionally skip over you. I think I could sum it up, and I can, from what I can tell, I think the board is probably okay with this change. Nothing to add for the council to weigh in on. Sound about right? Lots of nodding heads. Great. All right, please pass on our approval of the change to the ordinance. Okay. Thank you. The next item on tonight's agenda, the consent item. It's Preston Properties LLC requests a site plan amendment for 29 Pleasant Hill Road, Assessor's Map U50, Lot 30A. Jamel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you may recall, this project's in the industrial zoning district as well as the shoreland overlay. It's for the Next Gen Fitness Center. The applicant is proposing a 5,550 square foot building addition to the existing building on the property. The applicant was last before the board in early January, where the board moved this project to a consent item, so long as the applicant received their amended main DEP permit. The applicant did receive this permit and provided with their application materials to the board. The staff has incorporated any remaining comments into a draft motion with conditions for the board's consideration. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jay. So it is a consent item. Hopefully we've buttoned it all up. For the applicant, Elliot or Mr. Meek, is there anything that you needed to add to the item this evening?
No, I don't have anything to add at this point.
Okay. I'll turn it, sorry, we still have an opportunity for public comment on this item. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to talk on this issue? Please use the raise my hand feature on your Zoom. Okay, seeing no participants wishing to speak on this topic, I'm going to close public comment. Board, consent item, are there any remaining questions or clarifications you'd like to see? Nope, okay. Sounds like we're in good shape here. Jamel, do you have a motion for us?
Yes. Give me 1 second. All right. You guys see that okay?
Yes, I can. I move to approve the site plan amended titled Next Gen Fitness Center Building Addition as depicted on the plan set prepared by Sebago Technics dated 6/29/20 with the following findings and conditions. The applicant is proposing to construct a 5,550 square foot building addition. Proposal also includes stormwater management infrastructure and a new sidewalk to serve the proposed addition. The proposal is located at 29 Pleasant Hill Road and will utilize existing frontage. Property is located within the industrial and shoreline overlay zoning districts and is further identified on the town of Scarborough tax maps as map U50 lot 30A. Planning board has reviewed the application and supporting documentation and finds that the proposed design of the site plan adequately addresses the site plan review, shoreline zoning, and zoning ordinance requirements for site utilization and layout, access, internal vehicular movement, parking, pedestrian ways, landscaping, stormwater management, lighting, architecture, signage, utilities, and storage. Conditions: 1. Prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall revise the plan set to include A, modifications to the parking matrix on the site plan as noted in the staff review memo dated 7/13/20, and B, address the review comments in Woodard and Curran's review memo dated 7/9/20. This shall be reviewed and approved by the planning department. 2, prior to the start of construction, the applicant shall coordinate the required pre-construction meeting. Meeting shall include appropriate town staff, the developer, and their site contractor, and is to be coordinated through the planning department. That is the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Is there any discussion on the board? Okay, I don't see any. I'm going to do a roll call. Rachel Hendrickson,
Yes.
Roger Beely,
Yes.
Robin Saunders,
Yes.
Jennifer Ladd,
Yes.
Nick McGee. Yes. Show that to be 5-0. Congratulations. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Nick, this is Rick. Not to interrupt, but I can kind of hear a guitar in the background if someone's not on mute.
There are no guitar players in my household.
That may have been me. Sent my wife a text to get me a fan.
It sounded good, but it was a little distracting.
Sorry.
Thanks, Rick. All right. Next on the agenda, we have Crossroad Holdings LLC request a subdivision amendment for the Innovation District Assessors Map U53 Lot 4. Jamel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is within the Innovation District, the subdivision within the northern part of the Downs redevelopment project. The applicant seeking approval to allow for overhead three-phase power to be installed to private access drives instead of underground power as approved by the planning board around a year ago, July 2019. As the board may recall, the board and the applicant had extensive discussions during the subdivision review process last summer about overhead versus underground utilities throughout the Innovation District. The board approved overhead power along the public streets and underground along the private access drives within the Innovation District during the approval. Staff has noted in the comments that the proposal to install overhead utility lines is proposed outside of the public right-of-way and within private property. The site plan review ordinance allows for the board to require electric lines to be underground, so the board should be sure to provide direction and your comfort in regards to the proposal before you. Staff has also suggested that the applicant provide the board with the details associated with the proposed infrastructure along the private access drives, including the spacing of poles and the height of the proposed overhead lines. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jamel. Mr. Bacon?
Good evening, Dan Bacon here. Can everybody hear me? For some reason, my video camera is not working, but I'm sharing my screen. Is that visible?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So I apologize for the video. Thanks again for introduction, Jamel and Mr. Chair. I'm going to be brief, but I thought I'd provide a bit of background. Here, sorry, I'm just getting tuned up on technology. A bit of background as to the reasons for this subdivision amendment. And I wanted to back up before we jump into the technical details. I think as the board likely recalls, the Innovation District, the goals for it are really to be an economic development hub for the project for Scarborough and the region, and a home for manufacturing, light industrial, processing, high tech, those types of uses, really needing modern infrastructure and utilities. And so three-phase power is a key component for the district to be successful, as is fiber optics, which we're providing, in natural gas and other more conventional utilities. We've also been focused on opportunities for distributed and alternative energy, and are seeing some of that in some of our early applications. And as the board is well aware, kind of flexible lot layouts and to be responsive to end users, which we think has been pretty successful so far with our layout. So three-phase overhead is a real key component to that, and is fundamental to the district's success. We've learned quickly over the past year that it's necessary for the manufacturing machinery and data processing, et cetera, that we're attracting to the district. It's also key for kind of the heavy and variable electrical demands of those end users. And as I mentioned just before, it's required for kind of distributed energy and that kind of commercial scale solar that we're beginning to see. And in 2019, so just a year ago, as I think the board knows, we planned for three-phase overhead on Innovation Way and on Center Street. And at that time, we were anticipating running underground single phase back on the private drives. And because that in part was in response to the expectation that we be underground. You know, over this past year, we've learned a lot, and we really underestimated the critical aspects of having three-phase electric on all the lots in the district, and really to kind of meet these project-wide goals. And since that time, we've also learned a lot about the complications and the logistics and the costs associated with going underground with three-phase in this light industrial setting. It's a lot more complicated than overhead in terms of how you design it, how it's installed, and it's highly complicated in terms of doing it in a speculative way when we don't know what all the end users are going to be on these lots or their specific energy demands. And sort of lastly, the high water table in this area has become a pretty big challenge for that infrastructure design. So what we're seeking, as introduced by Jamel and included in our package, is to amend the subdivision requirement for underground power on these private drives so that we can do three-phase overhead on the private drives to reach those back lots. And in terms of sort of the design aspects, we understand that they're not necessarily as attractive as underground. And so we've taken a lot of time and consideration in terms of those design details so that the visibility of the overhead lines is limited. We're using taller poles than is customary so that the wires are 40 to 42 feet above the ground level, above the road surface. Buildings will all be kind of below that elevation unless we get some larger buildings in the future, but generally buildings will be well below that. It's going to be well below the eyesight, if you will, or the view shed from the sidewalk or from the road as you're driving or walking or biking through the project. We're also intending to provide underground feeds per the site plan ordinance from poles to each building, so they won't have a number of overhead lines kind of connecting poles to to individual buildings. And we're using the Hendrix wiring system, which is a very compact three-phase power design. So that's neat and tidy, and doesn't have a cross arm typically on the poles. And we're spacing the poles to really kind of limit the number of poles at generally 200 feet between poles. So in terms of its consistency with other projects, this is really how light industrial and industrial districts are designed. Enterprise Business Park is a very similar project. It has overhead three-phase power for, I think, all the same reasons to serve each lot. Higas Parkway was designed that way. That parkway is intended for the same types of uses and sort of the same demands and energy flexibilities in terms of accommodating the lots. And essentially all industrial parks are designed with three-phase overhead. So just to kind of give some visuals, this slide shows Enterprise Business Park on the left and how their poles and lines are configured with underground services from the poles to each lot. Higas Parkway is the image in the middle, the newly completed Foley Fitness out front, and then services underground. And then Innovation Way, the image on the right is a recent picture of what's been installed on Innovation Way. As you can see, the poles are as high or higher than those other two contexts to stay out of view, as are the lines. And this is what we'd replicate on the private drives. And kind of show the subdivision amendment and the plan we'd like approved as an alternate to what was approved a year ago. This shows in red where three-phase overhead is allowed for now. Coming in from Scarborough Downs Road, Innovation Way, and Center Street. And as you can see, the private drives we're showing allowing for overhead electric as necessary. And you're saying as necessary because, as you know, we're going to have multiple lots acquired by the same end user, and the private drive may not be built at all. And therefore it would go right underground from Innovation Way to a group of lots, or it may only be built 200 feet in or 400 feet in, and we would, adapt the power design accordingly. And just the final slide that I'm providing to help give some more specific context to the dynamic drive, which is the first private drive we're dealing with and discovering these challenges and needs. This image shows what's been approved. Throttle is here, AV Technic is here, and then on your agenda this evening, there's 3 buildings on lot 6 and 7. And per staff comments and our own consideration, we're showing this red line as where we're proposing the kind of limited overhead power, really going from Innovation Way along what would be the east side of Dynamic Drive. And on this side of Dynamic Drive, it's the furthest from buildings that are closer to Dynamic Drive, like Throttle. And in this building here that we're reviewing later this evening, which is fairly close to Dynamic Drive to provide the separation from those buildings, better fire response. And with this configuration, we'd generally have poles every 200 feet working with the driveway openings and other components that drive that. And that would be the intent on Dynamic Drive. So that's the end of my presentation. Rocky Risbert is also, I believe, a panelist, and Brian Gardner is our electrical engineer working on the project. He knows the details, so he can be a good technical resource for board questions. But with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Dan, we have an opportunity for public comment on this item. If you are here in attendance and would like to speak on this item, please just use the raise my hand feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your panel. All right, I don't see any public comment this evening on this topic. I will close public comment. We're fortunate enough to have two members of our board that are in the electrical field. And I'm gonna ask each one of them to kind of weigh in on this topic to start. Rick Duperi, do you wanna have first crack at this one?
Yeah, sure. Underground is always cleaner and prettier, but the Hendrix wiring system is probably the next best thing because it is, it's very compact and we do use it, and the utility uses it in high-end neighborhoods and areas where we're trying to make the utility lines look as pretty as possible. I guess I had a question for Dan. When you say, I understand the reasoning behind doing the overhead rather than the underground if you don't have defined loads in those buildings. So refresh my memory. Are all those buildings, are those lots still available, or have we defined what all those lots are going to be? And I apologize, I don't remember if all those lots have been before the planning board already.
Sure. Not all the lots have been before the planning board, so we don't know the details of what's happening on lot 12 in particular, which isn't spoken for yet. In addition, the lot 6 and 7 we're building, or associated applicant is building a mixed use kind of business incubator building that could have a wide range of end users and a wide range of energy demands. And it's critical that they be able to have 3-phase power. There could be light manufacturers, light processors. There also could be car collectors and low energy users. So those buildings are being marketed for that kind of business incubator use.
Okay. Dan, might be a nice compromise, and I don't know if you've gone this far down the road because the board obviously hasn't approved the overhead at this point, but part of the ugliness of utility work is the transformers and the secondary cables that come from those transformers over to the buildings. So a lot of times in these higher end neighborhoods and nicer areas, we'll use the Hendrix wiring system. So it's a straight line down the street on top of the poles, 200 feet apart, like you said, so it looks nice. But all the transformers will be underground and kept tight to the buildings. So at that point, you just have you just have the wires going down the poles encased in a conduit, and then they disappear into the ground, and then they never really reappear, because sometimes the transformers are inside the buildings and sometimes they're outside. But of course, as the board, we usually, try to keep those transformers somewhat out of sight. So was that in your plan to use overhead 3-phase primary down the street, but to drop down underground for the transformers up tight to the buildings? Rather than hanging secondaries, once you hang transformers up there and you run secondary wires to all those buildings, 3-phase secondaries are fairly heavy and they aren't as attractive as when you can't see the secondaries going under the ground. And then the secondaries, of course, would only be sized for the load of that building. That makes sense?
Yeah. I understand your comment. I think Rocky was going to say something. I mean, there's some sites that already are planning transformers, like I believe AV Tech is, but the others, it's less determined. So I don't know if Rocky or Brian want to comment on how best to proceed on that.
I do, but I'm not sure how to weigh in.
You're already talking, Rocky. We can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't see anybody but Dan's presentation, so I wasn't sure. I apologize. I would say that I'm wondering if we could get some flexibility there, and perhaps it's something that we address on site plan. As we come forward with site plans, I can see where in most cases we probably could do underground, ground mounted transformers. But I can also see an instance or two where we may not want to, or it might not make sense to do that. So I'm wondering if maybe there could be some flexibility there. I understand what you're saying. There you go. I can see the board now. I understand what you're saying, Rick. But I think, unfortunately, this whole thing is back before the board tonight because we didn't know what we didn't know back when we started. And we're finding that flexibility is going to be key here. So I'm thinking that would be probably important to us, but it's something we probably could address at each site plan as to how a transformer is serving that particular building. I don't know if I answered the question.
That makes sense, Rocky, and it does answer my question somewhat. I think what we would be saying is if the board was to approve this 3-phase overhead tonight, we would actually be doing that with the caveat that from on future site plans would evaluate whether the underground was possible and feasible, rather than just saying, okay, we're going to approve overhead for primary and secondaries. Because like I said, the primaries, Dan did a great job, and Hendricks is pretty. The secondaries aren't all that pretty. And I'm not sure if the utility, just so everybody knows, the utility moved away from 3-phase transformers now. We don't have a single transformer that will convert 3-phase primary to 3-phase secondary. So the secondary of buildings is 480 volts, and the primary is 7,000 volts. So in the past, we used to have one transformer. We only have 3-phase banks now. So every building will have 3 transformers on the pole if they're pole mounted, and then all the wiring associated with those 3 transformers going over to the building. So I would be in favor as a board member of approving the overhead Hendricks, the 3-phase, but reserving the right to evaluate each building to see if it's possible or feasible to do the underground, because underground is much better looking than the overhead.
All right.
So
Thanks.
if I could
That's all I really have to add.
If I could interject, so just to be clear, I want to make sure all the board members understand that the actual wire to the building itself would not be overhead in any scenario. It would be underground to every building. I just want to make that clear.
Thanks, Rocky. Rick Meinking, get your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the other Rick did a good job, and that's more his forte than mine. I do have a couple of comments. In the letter, it indicated that 3-phase power were generally the lower energy demand. And I don't think that's an adequate or an accurate statement to say, because the demand is really coming from the site. So 3-phase, the advantage of 3-phase certainly is a smaller conductor size and all of that, but it certainly doesn't change any of the demand because that is done from the site. I'm not in favor of overhead down these private ways. Number one, we don't know how they're all going to configure in terms of where the curb cuts are going to be and traffic flow with trucks and those kind of things. So it's very much in the air. But one thing that we haven't talked about is we've been talking about power, but what about all the other wires that are involved in this, like data cables and those kind of wires? You start adding all of that stuff up. Plus now, and I certainly understand, Rocky, what you're saying is the wires will be underground to the buildings, but those transformers are still going to be up on the poles. And this is an opportunity here that, again, if down the road we're looking at this from a very big time frame here, having to deal, and Rick, please close your ears when I say this, but down the road, you were mentioning in your comments about distributed generation and solar and all of that kind of stuff. When all of this stuff comes to fruition, which I really do hope it is, and I hope it really does happen, we now have another third party we're going to have to deal with in order to get all these other permits and all these other advances that we want to do. If we want to put in a solar field, or we want to put in a distributed generation, a trigen system, we're going to lose that ability to provide an easier pathway for somebody that can come in and do that. I do have issues with it going down main roads, but it is what it is. But going down these private ways, I think because of the voltage that we're sending it down here, I don't think the demand from whatever it gets put in these lots will not be able to be supported by the infrastructure that is originally put in. There's a lot of advantages to putting them overhead, chiefly the cost, and I get that, and I totally respect that. But again, we're now talking, on the agenda is this lot 6 and 7, where now we have the potential of residents living here and on a second floor, and yeah, your poles are higher, but you're going to see wires, and you're going to have storms that come up. And my personal, well, not personal, but I'm trying to let my constituents know that we would lose an opportunity for, developing an innovation district that not only has innovative buildings, but our pathway to get utilities to these buildings are of the new way things are being done. I'm reminded of the Route 1 down Falmouth that was all 3-phase power right on down, and it was all put underground, and it cost a whole lot more to do it then than if they had done it back when it was first developed. So we lose this opportunity of getting it in the ground because we're doing the digging now. Those are my feelings, not feelings, but those are my statements I'd like to have. And I totally get it about cost and everything, but there's not a lot of mileage here when we look at the innovation district and the length of these runs. It's not huge. And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Rick. Rachel?
Actually, I don't have a problem with it on the overhead, as long as we have a review on where the transformers are going to be, if they're going to be near the building or however that's going to work for each site. I do have a question and something to consider going forward, and that is, at least in the case of Dynamic Drive, we've already taken a look at landscaping and street trees, and we've got some ideas about where street trees are going to go. While the poles are certainly going to be taller than the street trees that are going to go in, unless we've got some white pines in there. I just want to make sure that there is not going to be any conflict with what we have already approved. And if there is, then I'd like to just take a look at it, or at least the planning board to take a look at it, because we do need the street trees along there. Poles start to interfere with the trees and with landscaping, and it's something to think about, something to consider. It's not a fatal flaw by any means, but I would like some consideration there, or at least knowing that people are thinking about how we're going to continue with what is really some very robust landscaping for that district. This is an industrial district, and as innovated is as much innovation as there is. People that are going to come in there are going to need the power. They're going to need a way to get it there faster, I guess. I understand the costs. I understand cost savings. And I think overhead lines simply come with the territory and come with an industrial park. So I have no problem.
Thanks, Rachel. Robin?
Yeah, I guess, the only complication I heard was high groundwater table. And I guess I'm a little bit disappointed that that would be a surprise to the developer at this point. I know I'm working on a project right now where underground electric is probably close to 10 times more expensive in high groundwater table areas. So I understand that it's cost, but it's the cost to do development. I think the developer and their staff have had many years to work through, understand these things. And I guess I'm just disappointed that it's a surprise. And I agree with Rick Meinking that it should not be overhead and that it should be underground, and it's a cost of doing business to conform with the ordinances. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Jennifer?
I know that staff can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I know staff had a question or point in the memo about coordination with the fire department, and I didn't know if you have spoken with them yet about that. If so, if you could fill us in at all, or maybe you haven't gotten to that point yet.
I can speak to that if I'm not on mute.
Hear you.
Okay. We have coordinated with the fire department to a limited degree. We've also understand their expectations from other projects and other areas of this project, most notably the uplands. And that's part of the reason we've located or are proposing to locate the overhead lines on the I'll call it the AV Tech side of the street. So it's looking at the dynamic on the right. And that's because the design of the buildings on the other side of the street are closer to the street, or the private drive, I should say, which would have more of a concern by the fire department. And there's a large parking area and there's a lot of building separation on the side that we're designing it. And we would work with the Lot 12 end user at that time to ensure that it meets the fire department's needs. So we've actually, in part, intentionally put it on that side to address that concern.
Okay, yeah, so the reason that I ask actually is because of the uplands, and I just remember the conversation around the fire department requiring or requesting full access to that building from all sides because they didn't have aerial access to that building from the main street, which in my opinion, if they had that, so if the power in that case had been underground, the site layout probably could have been very different or a lot less impervious area. So that was just something that I remembered from that prior conversation. And so just to confirm, which I think I did hear, was that regardless of what the decision is on these private drives, the plan would always be for a 3-phase underground connection if deemed necessary by the user for just their service. Is that right?
Correct. We would have underground power from the poles and the drops, from the wires down the poles underground to each building.
Okay. And so understanding again that, dropping that service to one user is potentially different and, a lesser impact, probably a lower cost than running the entire street underground. But I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on, I'm familiar, as many others are, with this just being a lot more expensive. And thank you, Robin, for chiming in on the challenges around working with high groundwater. But aside from that, is it larger? Is it deeper? What are some of the other challenges or obstacles that you're finding to burying this service?
So Brian Gardner's the expert on this, and he's on the call as well. So I suspect he's been listening. So, or Rocky, you put your finger up.
I'd like to jump in if I could. The biggest challenge is we don't know what we want. So as these users come along, we need to have flexibility to serve them in any way that they wish to be served. And so having to know what to put in the ground, but not know what you're going to build, it just you're putting the cart before the horse. So if we can go overhead, we know we can bring whatever that end user needs via the overhead. But if we have to put it in the ground beforehand, we don't know what to put in the ground. So then we have to overbuild the system in speculation for what somebody may or may not want. I think that's the layman's, that's what I got out of the conversations.
Sure. No, that's helpful. Go ahead, Brian, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, to go along with that, the biggest thing between overhead and underground too is the speed of repair, the flexibility, the speed of upgrade, the ease of upgrade. If it was discovered that a circuit that was run overhead was too small for some of the loads that were coming in, it's far quicker, easier, and cheaper to go and change that overhead line to a larger conductor if need be. Involves no street work, involves no redigging, involves no ensuring that you have the right size conduits. It makes it's just that much more expedient to both repair and grow. The other comment too is, I remember earlier, I just wanted to make sure that we are understood that the secondary conductors, as Dan, as others have said, from the pole would be routed underground to the building, and we are not at this time planning to do pole mounted transformers. So if anyone was concerned with pole mounted transformers, our goal was to go pad mounted transformers, lessening the amount of equipment up aerially, up on a pole as well.
And what about provisions for other utilities? So if you needed to go underground, would you be accommodating cable, telephone, alarms,
Yes.
wires, anything like that?
Yeah, to do your wire for all your low voltage systems would be pole mounted as well. And at each one of your riser poles where you're bringing down your primary conductors or your secondary conductors, if you were doing a pole mounted situation. But each time we're bringing conductors down the pole, we're bringing down two conduits generally for the power, and then you're bringing down oftentimes two for the low voltage systems as well down that same pole. They have a standoff bracket that allows the multiple conduits to come down the pole. So
but what about for an underground 3-phase along the private drive, not just the service connection to the building? What I'm getting at is, even if you needed to go underground for the 3-phase power, could we potentially be looking at a situation where utility poles would be required to carry a cable line overhead or something like that? I definitely think duplicate would be the worst case scenario.
If you were going to you do one or the other. If you were going to go underground, then you end up driving all those conduits underground, and you have separate manhole structures for communications and a separate manhole structure of power and separate distribution systems. And then alternate to that, you go both of those overhead. So you either do overhead or you wouldn't do both. You do one or the other.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, and right now within the subdivision, the only other wire on that pole is a fiber optic wire. Now we haven't, it's not precluded that some other provider could come in. Once CMP owns that system, they could let somebody else in. But right now, there's only one fiber optic provider, and that's it. Okay, thank you.
So, I thank you for explaining a lot of that. I have way too much professional experience in working around utility poles after the fact and the challenges that brings, from a lot of, changing times to changing, requirements within the right of way. And so many instances in projects that I worked on where we are picking up and having to, adjust kind of piecemeal or in a less than ideal way because no one thought ahead to put power underground when it was an option. In some cases, it's not an option because your infrastructure is 100 years old and it wasn't feasible then or whatever. But I think Rick Meinking was. I liked your terminology about having not just innovative end users, but sort of innovative infrastructure to support that as well. And it is much more difficult, probably, if the decision were to be made to bury this type of service, now feels like the time to do it instead of after the fact.
Thanks, Jennifer. Roger? Roger, you're on mute, and Rocky, you're not on mute right now.
Roger, I unmuted you.
Okay. I respect both Rick's opinions on this. Very helpful. From what I'm hearing is we're talking about overhead going down the private lane, the private roads, and then right at the pole going underground with the transformer is going to be somewhere either attached to the outside of the building or the inside of the building. Is that correct? That's the way it is now. I think there's plenty of evidence that the developers have been demonstrating from the very beginning that they want to make everything aesthetically pleasing as possible. I've seen no evidence to the contrary. Underground certainly is much more appealing, but this is a business or an industrial park. And I think they have to be as flexible as possible to be able to meet the demands of whoever may be interested in coming there. So I'm inclined to go with what the developer is proposing to do. We're not talking about a residential area. We're talking about an industrial park. And I just don't think that is going to be, people are not going to be probably even noticing the overhead cables, especially this style, when they're driving through a industrial park. It'd be different if it was a residential area, but I tend to agree with with what the developer is trying to do here. It has to be flexible. Never mind the cost of overhead and underground. So I'm inclined to give them the leeway as much as possible.
Thanks, Roger. I'll give my 2 cents on this. I look at this as I don't want it to be a lost opportunity, in the sense that we need to. It's okay to do things a little different, and I think if we look back at, I think Jennifer maybe had some examples of this, but if you look back at some areas, you're like, geez, I wish we had buried those lines when we had the chance. We have virgin ground here. I understand it's a huge expense, but I also think the developer has an opportunity to make up some of those increases with the cost of the lots. This is going to be a desirable area. I think it's going to do very well. I think the team that's been doing the planning and the building behind it is going to do very well and do well by the end users. And I think this is just another step in that progression. I'd like to see these lines underground. I don't want to beat around the bush. I think it's not an enormous ask considering
It is.
this project. Yeah, the scope of the project. I think this town has also, and you can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, the town has also stepped forward to help offset some of your infrastructure costs through some programs. And I think this also, in this area, in this location, in this town, I think there's plenty of opportunity for you to recover some of those costs. I'm not saying it won't be all of it, but some of those. So that's my 2 cents.
Hey, Nick, I'm sorry. Can I just like to, can I come back just for one one second, and I agree with everything that you said, but just to add a little bit of more technical information that I probably should have added earlier. Just from a technical standpoint, not from a cost standpoint, just from a technical standpoint, when the utility puts in underground, and this isn't from a utility standpoint either, this is just from just a realistic technical standpoint, is that generally when you put it underground, it's not overhead. You can, once the overhead line is in, and you can determine where you want to put your buildings, and you can move them around, and you can put in one building now and one building 5 years from now, and then trench it and put your power in. From a technical standpoint for underground, if the buildings aren't all laid out and the service entrances, that therefore where the power is going to enter the building isn't determined, and the size of the conductors that's needed from the overhead or from the main trunk line underground isn't determined, these manholes, these concrete vaults that have to go in the ground are generally placed in ideal locations to service the buildings and to minimize the wire underground so that nobody inadvertently hits it later when they're digging. And of course, we all call dig safe. But so I just wanted to point out that it's not just the money from a technical standpoint, from a installation standpoint. The developer would have to put in probably, let's say, 6 5-inch conduits where they may only need 2 because they need those extra 4 just in case they need that power pulled in. And then the concrete vaults would have to probably, if we don't know where the buildings are going to be or where the service entrances are going to be, those concrete vaults may have to double in quantity so that they're spaced out. So I just wanted to I should have done that before, and I apologize. I never try to go after the chair, but I just didn't felt I would feel guilty if I did not point out that there are technical challenges that can lead to waste in time, money, and trenching. If we don't know, generally before we do a drawing at the utility called a 905 drawing, we need to know where the buildings are, where the service entrances are, and how big the cable needs to be from that trunk line to the building to accommodate that service. And I don't think in this particular case, all that information is going to be available up front. So there are going to have to be more conduits put in the ground and more, which costs money, but it's also just, it's more than just money. I don't know if I did a good job there, but I just wanted to point out that there are technical challenges, not just cost considerations. That's all. From the utility standpoint, it doesn't matter to the utility. They will do whatever you want.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Rick. Any other board members, further discussion on this topic? Roger. Gotta hit your mute button. There you go.
Okay. I think it's interesting. We're just starting the beginning of this particular development, and this has already come forward. The developers have already realized that they have to have the flexibility to meet the demands that they're hoping to see. It's not like this development is halfway through and all of a sudden this is coming up. So I really would urge my my colleagues to be a little bit more flexible, I guess. There's a lot of competition out there, and I think we have to recognize we got some nice projects going on in this phase right now, and I want to see it continue as rapidly as possible. That's going to certainly benefit the town in terms of the tax base and everything. But I guess I've said my piece.
Rocky?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, if the board can't allow this to go forward tonight, it's going to force us to rethink the Innovation District. I know that the buildings that are on your agenda for later tonight we probably would pull those items if we can't serve them overhead. What it's going to force us to do is find large end users that we can hit simply off the innovation district. And we have some large end users where we think we're going to be combining lots and there'll be less of these private ways. But it simply does not work for us. I mean, I'm not here telling you a story tonight because I want to save a few bucks. It does not work for us. If the board can't work with us and allow us to put overhead power on private property, then we're going to need to rethink the innovation district. It's that simple to me. And so I know I'm putting some pressure on the board, but I'm not asking for this because I don't really need it. We need it.
Let me follow that up with a question. Had you at any point considered dividing your innovation district into two separate sides? Whereas if there's an end user that is really going to need three-phase power, you're sticking them on the north side of the Downs Road. It's not the Downs Road. What road is that one?
Some of that is happening naturally and will happen naturally, but no, we're trying to have ultimate flexibility so that where we need to put a couple of lots together, we do, and where somebody needs a single lot, they can have a single lot. We're finding
what I'm saying is there's got to be room here, Rocky, for, I mean, and I get the fact that things developed and changed on your end, but when this was first presented to the board and master planning and, a couple years ago, we were assured that all the power would only be overhead on the major roadways. So what I'm saying is here, I get it. New information came to light, things changed on you. You want to be flexible. I think Rocky, you need to appreciate the fact that this board has been very flexible with a lot of your proposals, not just in this district, but in other areas. And we are proud to have you working in this town. But I also think it's unfair to try to pin the board into a back corner on something when we were actually pitched a plan. We agreed to a plan. I can sympathize that facts on the ground has changed and you want to remain flexible. So what I'm asking you at this point, at this stage, is at any point have you considered trying to compromise in the sense of, half of our innovation district, we will commit to keeping those lines underground. The other half of the innovation district, we need some flexibility. And then your clients that might come to look to purchase lots in one or the other, it's okay to sometimes tell them you can't have lot 18, but you know what? Lot 37 is available. I mean, have you thought about that?
Well, we've been doing a whole lot of that. I haven't tried to steer somebody to where they could get three-phase power versus where they can't get three-phase power. I don't know how I would do that in this market. We know that we are at the absolute top of the market. We cannot ask any more money for what we're offering the market, and we're struggling. We're struggling with it. The cost in the Downs has been far over what we ever thought it would be. And I know the town's helping us with that, but that doesn't take away from the fact that, things either work or they don't. To answer your question, no, we haven't tried to steer somebody towards where there might be three-phase that's easily accomplished or not. It's just it's like another handcuff put on that it's tough to try to get these end users and fit them in, meet their needs, and make it all work. That's about all I can say.
This is Rick one more time. Just to I understand what Nick's getting at, and where you could have three-phase underground on one side, and potentially three-phase overhead on the other side, and kind of move the customers around. But just because I have the technical knowledge in this instance, we would not, the utility, Central Maine Power, would not feed a industrial park with single-phase power, and the reasoning being that the three-phase power needs to be balanced. In other words, every conductor needs to carry approximately the same load. If they don't, then we get the return current on the neutral, which is not something anybody wants. So utility struggles every day and strives to balance the load on the three-phase. So we will run single-phase down one neighborhood, and then the next street down, you'll see that, the first neighborhood's off the line closest to the street, and then the next neighborhood's off the middle line, and then the next neighborhood's off the third line. And we try to do that as we go down, around, so that the power's balanced. An industrial park, by definition, a good utility engineer would not feed an industrial park with single phase, because you will overload that single phase and you'll end up burning down the neutral. So that industrial park is going to be three phase, whether Rocky wanted it or not. The engineer that's in charge of that district wouldn't run single phase down there. So,
Yeah, Nick, can I say something?
I just want to make sure. Hold on, Robin. Is Rick, are you finished?
Yeah, I just thought I'd throw it. Just try to help.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah,
Robin.
I'm finished.
Sorry, I've had my hand up for a while. There's nothing new about Scarborough being marshy. There's nothing new about there being a high groundwater table at the downs, at the marsh. We've been talking about the fact that it's located between two watersheds since the beginning. I don't think, I fully support our chair in saying that we don't need to be pushed into a corner. We don't need veiled threats of maybe we need to rethink the innovation district, because maybe we do, and we do have some counselors. Yeah, and we do have some counselors who might like to rethink the innovation district. So maybe that's not such a bad idea. And so if this is what's going to take to sort of have us slow down and think about this, and as Rick DuParry said, any good industrial engineer will ensure that there's three phase. Do you have an industrial engineer who's helping out? And I apologize if that's who Brian Gardner is, but for the interest of time, I think we should move on. I see that we have a split sort of board in this instance. And so maybe we need to move on, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Robin. Do I have any other board members that want to add anything to this before? Roger. Roger, you're on mute.
Jeez. I'm all set. I'm just kind of curious if staff would like to weigh in on this at all.
Thanks, staff. I'll weigh in on their behalf. This is basically, this is the planning board's course. This is a board decision. So yeah, for what it's worth, if you want to speed this up a little, I'm okay with that. What I would prefer to see, if I was going to be pressured into something, I could live with a compromise. I could live with seeing lots, 16 through 45 to the east. That's the east. South, I guess. The south on the compass. Saying, okay, those are all overhead. They're kind of buried in the back. But when you're coming through that intersection, I mean, we've got some really nice buildings there. That's going to connect into kind of a more of a centralized downtown area. I wouldn't mind seeing that prettied up a little. So, I think at this point, of course, anyone on this board can make a motion to approve the amendment. I would prefer to see a compromise of some sort come back at this time. I'm not in favor of the applicant's proposal as it stands. To be fair, I'll call for the motion, and then we can let the votes come down as they may, and then we'll see what the next step would have to be on this. So,
Mr. Chair, if I might interject, so staff did draft a motion because we obviously didn't know what the board's decision was going to be, and we can bring that up and share that. And I've tried to capture a little bit of what Rick DuParry was talking about with regards to transformers. I will just sort of make mention that if the board votes, typically our ordinance says that if the application is denied, it's a year until one can come back, and it may be worth just seeing what the applicant's interest is in with regards to your final suggestion there. Because as I have sort of tallied up my checks and minuses, we need 4 votes for 3 votes, I'm sorry. And I think I was at 2 favorable at this point. So I just sort of offer that up for, maybe we want to continue discussion before a motion.
Jay, Jay, I really appreciate that. My intent is never to cause a delay, such as a 1-year wait to come back for an issue like this, especially in a project like this. That's not a reasonable request either. So I appreciate you catching that on the technical side. So, has anyone's, opinion changed from what maybe Jay's tally has been? I think Rick and Rick, you're alternates this evening. So I'm really looking for Jen, Rachel, Roger, and Robin. Do we think we have 3 to approve the current proposal? I don't see 3, Rocky. So could I ask Dan and Rocky? I did throw out an idea, and I'll ask a quick straw poll of the rest of the board. Maybe trying to, split the baby, so to speak, on this, if maybe the board would find that more appealing. And
Mr. Chair, sorry.
Yes.
It's harder to do this without the video on, so I feel handicapped tonight, but just to speak to that potential, we are working with a number of interested end users that are likely to acquire multiple lots and to shorten and reduce private drives. So I think just by that nature, there's going to be, not all these private drives will be built, and not all these private drives are going to have overhead power, given that they will just be served underground from Innovation Way. So I think that there's an opportunity here to come up with a program where there's the private drives that need to be built out in their entirety and end users at the end, warranting 3-phase power. We'll work on a sleek way to do that. That's low impact, but overhead, and that there's going to be a number that won't, and that we can come to the board more on a private drive by private drive basis could be kind of how we proceed. I think there's an opportunity there, and I think it may result exactly as you're maybe envisioning, Mr. Chair, in terms of having limited overhead power on the private drives. The issue at hand is dynamic drive, in the immediate future.
Thanks, Dan. Rachel?
Yeah, I would be in favor of kind of saying that the motion tonight should simply deal with dynamic drive. The developer knows where the buildings at least are going in. And evidently AV Technic is one that really needs the extra power and needs to know what's going on now. But we don't know what's coming down the pike, as Dan said. We don't know, how many of these private drives that are going to be left. I do want to remind all of us that this discussion concerns private land. These poles are on private land and not connected really on a public street. It's on private property. And I always have a concern about overreach on our part when we start to take a look at trying to govern what private owners are going to be doing. So I would like to see, I would not at all object to seeing this be for this dynamic drive only, allowing the developer and his engineers an opportunity to take a look at what's left, what some of the folks are coming in, and what may be coming down the pike, and be willing to deal with it on a case-by-case basis.
So just to follow up, it sounds to me like there's some support for a drive-by-drive basis, private way, private way. I get some head noddings or head shakings one way or the other. No? Roger, you're unmuted, so go ahead.
I would say if this is amenable to the developer, then this might be a good compromise.
Okay, so we're going to take the proposal for the one drive tonight. Is that what we're looking at?
Which,
Jay, go ahead. You've got a,
Yeah, I guess it's, so the application before you is for overhead in the whole subdivision. And so I guess where I'm hearing the board conversation go down the path of is really just taking up Dynamic Drive, which is that roadway with AV Tech and up to lots 6 and 7. Is that where you're generally headed at this point? I want to be sure we're clear.
I think you should take the application on its face, which is, this is the application we have before us. I'd prefer not to take a vote on this at this time because I don't want to see it go away for a year. Does that sound fair? What I guess I would probably recommend is that the applicant consider coming back to the board in a couple weeks with a proposal to discuss 6, 7, 11, 12, 29, and 28, that private drive. And I think that being taken up would probably result in a better conversation rather than the entire district. That's my sentiment.
Yeah, agreed.
Anyone else? So Dan and Rocky, do you want us to take a vote or are you going to go back to the drawing board?
If I might, I don't want you to vote no, because, you know, then I absolutely have to come back with a completely different subdivision, which I'm probably gonna have to do it anyway. But my issue is I have AV Tech wants to have power on when they move in their building. So.
Can they grab that from the, can they grab that
Well,
from the
let
street
me-
side?
you already know the load down there. If you've got every lot already figured out except lot 12, from what I understand, so you know the load. What would we be trying to figure out here if we allow overhead on a load that we already know, or we go underground with a load we already know? I don't know what we gained from that conversation.
Fair enough. So, I'm going to say there's, if somebody on this board wants to make a motion, they're welcome to. Without that, I'm going to say that it's time for us to move on to the next topic on the agenda.
And it may be, Mr. Chair, if I might, probably be prudent for the board to table the matter and request the applicant make adjustments to their plans, you know, consistent with the deliberation, and come back at a later date, just to formalize sort of the action of the board.
That's fair. I'll make a motion to table this item.
Second.
I have a second. Any discussion? Roll call. Jennifer Ladd,
Yes.
Robin Saunders,
Yes to tabling.
Rachel Hendrickson,
Yes.
Roger Beely,
Yes.
Nick McGee. Yes. So that motion's table. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Next item on tonight's agenda, Waterstone Properties Group, Inc. requests a site plan review of 700 Gallery Boulevard, Assessors Map R37, Lot 3307. Jamel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this project is located in the Scarborough Gallery development in the B2 zoning district. The applicant's proposing a nearly 2,500 square foot restaurant building with drive-through service on the northwest portion of Lot 7 within the Scarborough Gallery development. It's adjacent to the existing retail building that was approved by the board 2 years ago or so in 2018. Staffs and the town's traffic consultant have noted that the applicant did provide information about the prospective restaurant tenant. Have not provided. If the applicant is proposing a coffee shop or similar use, the Maine DOT may require a modification to the existing traffic movement permit or a new standalone permit. The applicant should provide the board with an update on any necessary traffic permitting for the proposed project. The zoning standards for the B2's district require parking lots and access drives to be buffered in accordance with the town's design standards. So to this end, staff has recommended that the applicant screen the drive-through lanes and noted that the board can request perspectives of the proposed building to illustrate the relationship of the site to the surrounding streets. So the applicant should be prepared to discuss the proposed site and building design to the board this evening. Staff has also recommended that the applicant provide a sidewalk connection from the existing network associated with the adjacent retail building in Lot 7. And the zoning standards also require the applicant to include a plan that depicts the required 6 vehicle parking spaces, stacking spaces for each drive-up window. So this information will need to be included on a future plan submitted to the board. At this point, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Jamel. And I just want to make a quick reminder for not only our applicants, but our board members as well. Let's stick to the main points. We're going to assume that the secondary issues listed under staff comments are agreeable to the applicant. If you as a board member or as the applicant have an issue with one of those secondary items, please just single it out. No need to go through the entire list until we get to that one. But yeah, we want to be efficient with this time. So with that, Mr. Morrow and Mr. McKinn, and Mr. Richardson, welcome.
Good evening, E. McKinn with Jones Beach Engineers, project engineer for this project. Jamel gave some good background on the project. Just to get down to it, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as Torres pointed out, we're in the northeast corner of the lot. This overall development was proposed as 3 separate structures, if you count this as a single structure, back in 2014. In 2018, this alternate mixed-use retail was approved, and now we're coming in to fill out this last pad site in the northeast corner. And so we're proposing the proposed restaurant with drive-through, 14 proposed spaces where 11 are required, 2 of which will be ADA compliant. The drive-through does meet the town standard per the staff review. And I will say that we have prepared a response letter to all those staff comments along with revised plans, and we're able to meet all staff comments. Overall, the site flows very nicely with one-way traffic around the building. With the revised plans that we'll be submitting to staff, we are able to get fire truck access entirely around this building, and we'll have connection to the adjacent retail. Stormwater for the site is unique in the sense that the overall project was approved by Maine DEP. When we went in for our amendment for this retail use, we were allowed to use the existing treatment features. When we go back, we will be submitting an amendment probably in the next week to Maine DEP, and we are required to treat on site all required impervious. And we do that through 2 tree filter units with downstream detention. So we'll meet that requirement. Utilities for the site are fairly basic. We'll be coming in off of Gallery Boulevard with our water, sewer, gas. Electric will be served by an existing transformer shared with the adjacent structure. That's the current plan. We're waiting on feedback from CMP on that to make sure that will work. We'll be submitting to PWD in the coming days for our water service and are finishing the grease trap calculations so that we can submit to the Scarborough Sanitary District for that approval. Lighting design for this project, very similar to the adjacent structure. We were actually able to limit our lighting to a single pole. Be the same exact pole in the adjacent parking lot. And landscaping. So the landscaping on this plan set is limited to the areas surrounding the building to fill in those landscaped islands, and some additional areas where we've proposed some additional buffering. Based on the staff comments, we've actually built up this plan to include some additional buffering areas. And those will be seen in our response materials. We are requesting a waiver this evening for a stamped landscape plan. And the reason for that being that in the 2018 approval, the areas around the outside of this pad site were designed and improved with a landscape plan stamped by a Maine landscape architect. And that's actually seen here. So this is from the 2018 approval, just for reference to the board. So there was an approved plan there, and that's in our waiver request later. And lastly, the building elevations, very same style as the adjacent structure. We do not know the tenant at this time. So that's why the project's been designed with the same style. And we have prepared a traffic impact memorandum that was submitted. I think there's some confusion as to who received this, but we will be sure to submit this with the response materials so that the project's peer review engineer can review that. And our traffic engineer is on the line this evening if there are any traffic related items. In that traffic memorandum, we did confirm that considering this structure as a Starbucks for calculation purposes, we are under the the increase of 100 trips in any given peak hour. So that would not require a modification of the TMP. And we do provide some additional language to that in our response back to staff. And that's really all. I already mentioned that we do have a package prepared to respond to all staff comments. And if there's any additional comments tonight, we'll be sure to include that in the response package.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Anyone else from your team need to go tonight? You're all set.
I think that's it for now. We'll have Wayne Morrill if he needs to chime in on any other permitting aspects. We do have Doug Richardson on the line from Waterstone Scarborough if there's any questions about the architectural elevations. And then we do have Derek Caldwell on the line, our traffic engineer, if there's any traffic related questions.
Well, thank you very much. At this time, we have opportunity for public comment. If you are here to speak on this issue, please use the raise my hand feature in the bottom right corner of your screen. We'll call on you to give you a chance to speak on it. All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. I'm going to turn this over to the board. Rachel, you want to go first?
Sure. Let me ask you a question about the drive-in. There's only going to be one window for the drive-in, so that all of the cars are going to stack up until somebody puts an order in and then gets the order. Is that correct?
There's a pickup window. This would be similar to, say, a typical fast food in terms of how it's ordered. We are proposing an order box and menu board.
Okay.
On this north side of the building.
All right. About how many seats inside?
Since we don't know the tenant at this time, Doug, are you on the line? Do you have an anticipated seat count based on this size building?
It would be approximately 30 to 40 seats. We are not currently pursuing coffee. It is a food use with a pickup window.
All right. I'm wondering if that then it's going to be a sit down of 30 or 40 seats, whether that parking is going to be adequate for your staff as well as the customers. When you portray the building and the, I'm sorry, the phone is ringing in the house, and my husband will get it sooner or later. It's another fundraiser, I'm sure. Or somebody wants to know if I voted yet. When you show the elevations, one of the things that you also need to show is the elevations in context. In other words, what it looks like from the street. You've talked about the landscaping that you have there, but until we can kind of see how the landscaping and the building interact, we need to see that. So as you go forward, I'm willing to hold a little bit on talking about the landscaping because I do have difficulty visualizing it in context. But it's quite possible that the landscaping that was appropriate 4 years ago or 6 years ago, at this point, given this use, we might need, or you might need more landscaping or berms in order to do some screening from the road.
Yep, we will look into getting those perspectives prepared at your request.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. If this does become a franchise, it will not be, what we approve will not be that franchise style. So do you see yourselves coming back, or the franchisee coming back saying, okay, well, now we have these building plans, except now we're a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts or something else, and we want to change the architecture, we want to meet the franchisor's design standards?
As of right now, it's planned to coordinate with the building that's been recently constructed and fully tenanted. We have franchises that are national in there, and they have to work with the building that we design.
That's good to know. All right, thank you. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, one quick point. We will do the rendering, but the monument sign is largely burned and screens the portion of the building as you enter the site. So we'll take a look at that and show it.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Rachel. Robin.
So with respect to the waivers, has there been any analysis or reconciliation of the existing landscape plan to see if what you're proposing is in compliance with that, or has the landscape plan and maintenance plan been kept up to date?
You're asking, basically, we've confirmed that what was approved in 2018 was built to spec.
Yes.
We have not completed a site walk to confirm based on that approved plan, but we can walk the site, now that we're in growing season, we can walk the site and make note of areas that were modified. And if so, we can come back and discuss with you, or if they were missing, we can make sure those get on this landscape plan.
Yeah, to me, I think that's an important point to just sort of talk about what's there. Also, if what's in the landscape plan is not there, you know, we would want to look to you to augment or supplement that. So I would be okay with that waiver, but where we don't know who's going in there yet, I'm not completely comfortable with the traffic impact study waiver for many of the points that the staff have put in their staff comments. I guess I'm also wondering about buffering and pedestrian connection. Can you just sort of, I guess, let's start with pedestrian connection. Can you sort of address that, Ian?
Yeah, so I guess there's two options. So I actually do have the revised plans that I'm going to be submitting to the board that will show that pedestrian connection. But if you don't want me to show that, I can just.
Nope, that's fine. As long as you're going to comply with, you know, what the ordinances are. And is it the same thing for the buffering too?
Correct.
Okay. And no issues with the stack spaces either that the staff have proposed? Great.
Correct. I've submitted a truck turning plan that also combines that with the stacking and shows those vehicles. So we are able to. We'll be sure to address any of the specifics about the actual comments on the traffic calculations and what comes of our traffic memo, just to confirm that we do stay under the threshold, and we can continue the discussion on the waiver.
Great. I'm all set then, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Robin. Jen?
That sounds good. Just curious to elaborate a little bit more on the landscape waiver. I think Robin's point was great about checking to see whether or not what's already there complies with what was approved, but I would maybe ask that you expand on that a little bit and just help us make the connection to some of the internal plantings that you've proposed. So the ones directly adjacent to the building within that drive aisle, are those also consistent with maybe the type and scale of plantings that were also approved in that larger approval. And my only other question was, will we know, and I apologize if you just mentioned this or not, but will we know either who the tenant is or a more narrow description of the tenant in terms of traffic before we approve this project? Like, will you be coming back? Do you think that you will have that information when you come back again?
I doubt the developer will have any sort of signed letter of intent that allows them to speak to who the specific tenant is. But I do believe since that traffic memorandum, which was completed under the assumption that it's Starbucks, I believe the intent is that they've kind of narrowed that down, that they've come away from a heavy morning user to more of and it's not a fast food drive-through, it's more of just a food user who's looking to get a drive-through use. So I'll work with Mr. Richardson, our traffic engineer, and if we feel that is the direction we're moving, we'll make sure to revise that traffic memorandum. So again, you can see that those calculations show that we don't need any modifications to our permit.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thanks. And if I can just have board members too, as they have their turn, just quickly weigh in on the waiver request, whether you're comfortable with the current requests that they've proposed.
Based on those answers, well, I would just like to see a little bit more information before agreeing to those waivers. If you can come back with information on that shows you're consistent with all of your landscaping, not just that around the perimeter of your site, I would be in support of the landscape waiver, and with a little more detailed information on the end user supporting the traffic waiver.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Roger. You're on mute, Roger.
I'm basically satisfied with the questions that have been asked of the applicant, and I'm pretty sure that they're going to be coming back with the appropriate responses. I tend to agree with what Jen just said regarding the waivers, waiting until we see them next time. To the best of my recollection, driving through that area, I go through that area quite often. I don't think much has been done in terms of the landscaping at that particular corner, but that's understandable considering that you're not sure what was going to be going in there. So I'm willing to wait and see how that develops at the next meeting.
Thanks, Roger. Robin?
I already went, Nick. And did you need anything more from me?
Waiver requests?
Yeah, I said I need a little more information on the landscape one. Otherwise, in order to agree with it, but I'm not necessarily in favor of a traffic waiver.
Thanks. Rick Duperi.
I'm good with the questions that have been asked, and I'm not a voting member, so on the waivers, I'm a default to the voting members.
You never know what happens next week, Rick. Thanks. Rick Meinking.
And I know it was addressed on the comments from the staff about your lighting schedule and your plans are kind of flip-flopped. So I'm assuming you're going to fix that all up. I will note that you have a 2.27 candle watt average, which I don't know if you could come back with a photometrics that show the fixtures and the spread of the fixtures, I might be able to understand how you're getting, 2 candle watts from that one bottom corner on the left-hand side of the proposed restaurant. It seems high, so I'd like to see the spreads on the cut sheets. And the other note I have is you're speccing out 4,000 K on the temperature. I'm just wondering, have you checked with the existing fixtures that are around the other areas to see if those aren't 3K or what? Your note 7 on your lighting plan says that they are dark sky compliant. A 4,000 Kelvin fixture will not get dark sky compliant because of the temperature rating. So that note would have to be adjusted to say that it is not dark sky. It may be full cutoff, but it won't be dark sky compliant unless you're at 3K. That's the only thing. So I'm a little bit fuzzy on the photometrics. And in terms of the waivers, Rick DeBree said it, and I'll just say it again. I think more information would be helpful for my colleagues to make an informed decision on the landscaping and on the other waiver referring to the traffic impact. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, I think that we've covered it as a board collectively. So I guess we await the next submission and look forward to the updates that you'll be providing us. Any questions on Roger? Go ahead.
Yeah, just one quick question to Mr. Is it Richardson? Richards? Is this the last lot to be developed? Did I read that in there somewhere?
That is correct. We are fully tenanted in the buildings, the 2 buildings that are there, and this would be the last structure.
Okay, good, great. Thank you.
All right, any clarifying questions from the applicants or from staff before they have to go back and resubmit?
Nothing from me. We'll provide all that additional information the board requested.
Thank you very much. Good luck. We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda this evening is MRW Development LLC requests a preliminary subdivision and site plan review for a lot 6 within the Innovation District, Assessor's Map U53, Lot 4. Jamil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're back in the Innovation District, as you noted, and the applicant's proposing 18,000 square foot warehouse and garage building and a nearly 7,700 square foot mixed use 2-story building consisting of warehouse garage space on the first floor and 8 apartment units on the second floor within Lot 6 in the Innovation District. The project's located at the end of Innovation Drive. So given that the applicant is proposing more than 3 residential units within a 5-year period, the application requires both subdivision and site plan approval by the board. The applicant will need to include a subdivision plan with required plan notes and a net residential calculation with future submissions. Staff has provided several comments in regards to the proposed parking program on the site, including the required parking lot striping, recommended hash marking between the spaces and garage doors, a revised parking matrix, and the possible implications of the proposed parking area within the drainage easement. Staff has also suggested that the applicant discuss the proposed parking program and how they intend to manage uses and avoid conflicts on the site with the board. Staff has recommended that the board and the applicant discuss the proposed pedestrian amenities along Dynamic Drive, given that a residential use is now proposed near the end of the drive. Perhaps a discussion around sidewalks should be considered instead of the painted advisory lanes as currently approved. Staff has also recommended that the applicant modify the design of the property to include plantings and landscaping along the southern, northern, and portions of the western property lines to screen the site from abutting properties. And staff provided several comments in regards to the proposed building design. Staff would like to note that the proposed fenestration calculations for building A will need to be provided to the board to ensure these buildings meet the fenestration requirements. And overall, the applicant should just be prepared to discuss the site design and building design with the board. And I think at this point, Angela would like to discuss some of the proposed stormwater facilities on the site. I'll turn it over to her.
Thanks. I think St. Clair Associates did a good job explaining out a little bit of the stormwater, but I just wanted to highlight it just so we have a conversation around it. 6 and 7, this agenda item as well as the next, we talk about the fact that the the permitted stormwater facilities on the site, the large wet pond is designed for a certain amount of impervious area per lot. However, there is some leeway to increase the impervious area as long as you're treating on site. And that's what this applicant is doing as well as the next. But one of the things we talk about, I know we've talked about in some workshops, is around our MS4 permitting, and specifically one of the things for our stormwater federal and state permitting is looking at encouraging LID, so low impact development. And so I think it's always good for the board to have a conversation around ways in which we can look at reducing our impervious areas in town. That is one of our requirements for that permit, is to have these conversations around it. And I will say that minimizing the development impacts is one of the main principles of low impact development. So it's always good to have that conversation. And just to kind of go back and forth a little bit with the applicant, just to make sure that we're in a good spot. And this is what's practical for this site and for this area. Staff's not weighing in really one way or the other where we land with that number. I just want to make sure that there's a good conversation around it. That's all.
Angela?
Thanks.
All right, and turn that over to, is Nancy doing it? Dan? Nancy?
I'm going to jump in. Again, sorry I'm not on the screen. It's hard to to raise my hand, but I'll start the presentation, then turn it over to Nancy. Thanks, Mr. Chair and staff. So we've talked about this area of the project a little bit earlier. This is lot 6 and 7, as Jamel introduced. We thought it was pretty important to put up this graphic to show the two sites, this item on the agenda and the next one. They've been designed in close coordination and to orient you to the things that are around it, which have a lot to do with staff comments and a lot to do with our design. So as you can see here, if the screen is sharing, I guess I should check to make sure. Thanks, Angela. Dynamic Drive, it comes up from Innovation Way, and there's 2 buildings proposed on lot 6, 1 on lot 7. They're incubator spaces on both lots. So there's going to be on the first floor of all 3 buildings, 2,200 thereabouts to 1,100 to 1,000 square foot light industrial spaces that could accommodate a wide range of economic development and manufacturing and end users, light industrial end users. We've cited all of these buildings pretty deliberately. The barn that we've sort of at least temporarily called it, the first building is a mixed use building. It has residential upstairs and incubators on the first floor. We've located that building very intentionally to be the one closer to Throttle, in the office building that's in Throttle that really engages with the back of Throttle. And there's going to be parking only for the residential tenants south of the barn building. So it's going to be separate from more of the light industrial incubator traffic that'll be to the rear of the sites around the incubator buildings. We've kind of located these buildings also deliberately in terms of their relationship to this pathway, which is also a stormwater maintenance access way that we think residents will use and enjoy, and the connection for the residents and employees of these sites to the trail system, which is shown on this plan. So we've kind of, from a landscaping and view perspective, we've been intentional on having kind of more robust landscaping to the south of the barn or the barn building. We really like the views for residents and businesses or employees and these end users of the pond, of the open area, and the woods in the view shed. So we've been pretty intentional in terms of not hiding that view. We think that's an amenity. So we'd rather not add landscaping along this edge in favor of what's a pretty nice view right now. And also it's an area that generally needs to be stay clear because there's a big stormwater pipe within that area. I think also from a kind of larger planning standpoint, we wanted to bring up the fact that this area also abuts 25 acres of conservation, which is part of the project to the north in the trail system. So we think that's a very nice buffer to the wetlands and to the trail system, and a pretty good balance with the compact nature and the impervious coverage that we have here. We've been trying to be quite deliberate in terms of narrowing up the paved areas and have a few different waivers asking of the board to have narrower drive aisles than would be typical in order to reduce impervious area and really focus on kind of the buildings in terms of impervious area for floor area ratio and end users. So we have a 20-foot wide kind of drive aisle intentionally for the mixed use building, which needs a waiver. And it's worked pretty well for other parts of our project. And then there's slightly narrower drive aisles around the Lot 6 incubator building to reduce impervious area. So in addition to that, we do understand the comment around bike and pedestrian movement. That's actually why we thought the advisory bike lanes were a good fit for dynamic drive. And those are, remind the board, those were actually striped areas along a really kind of a shared street concept along the drive to have space allocated specifically for cyclists and pedestrians. It's worked quite well on Eastern Road, which is a much more heavily populated area, a much busier road than this shared driveway. And we think for the amount of traffic dynamic drive will get, coupled with the other trails that we have to get to Innovation Way, it's a good fit. And it would reduce impervious area, not to add another kind of sidewalk impervious area. So taking kind of that shared street and then walking or biking down it, you get out to Innovation Way and the crosswalks, and where the street is busy, Innovation Way, we have a sidewalk to accommodate pedestrians. So we think kind of all in all, that's the right approach for this location. I think in addition, in this plan, and I'll jump to the next one as well, shows some good feedback we got from the board when Zoom Drain was proposed for at least Lot 6. So we had a somewhat similar layout to Building A for the Zoom Drain end user who's not moving forward in this location. And there was, good questions about how does the lot across the street relate? How is access controlled? How is traffic controlled? So we've come up with this design where dynamic drive comes up, obviously, and then comes to a four-way intersection that'll be very customary. And we are envisioning that dynamic drive, for all intents and purposes, ends at this four-way intersection. And then lots 6 and then 7, the next agenda item, really are sites. They're designed as commercial sites. The buildings are going to look the same. The layouts are the same. So you feel like you're leaving more of a drive or private road and entering a site. And we think that's going to work pretty well from a circulation standpoint. And I think responds to certainly what questions were raised by the board with the last applicant when Lot 7 wasn't as clear in terms of an end user. And as I mentioned earlier, Building B is that mixed use building where the residential would be upstairs. And we have a parking area south of it that's just for the residences. So if you rent or live in Building B, you're the only one, you and visitors are the only ones using that parking lot. There'll be some signage we're working on to make that clear. And then if you work or visiting the commercial aspect of these sites, then you come through this intersection, you access building B to the rear, where there'll be entry doors and overhead doors, as well as gain access to building A and lot 7. I think in addition to that, and Nancy's going to get into the stormwater aspects and some other details, I just wanted to touch on architecture quickly. This is the rendering we have for building A on lot 7. So the back building, the incubator building. We're pretty excited about the design. We think it is pretty modern. It defines the innovation district well. And it's designed to be kind of that incubator space, that flexible space. So what you see here is obviously overhead door access, high overhead doors to get into the open areas of each tenant space. There's entry doors and windows that are below the canopies. The canopies help define the entries, the people entries to the building. And we're using kind of modern light industrial material with vertical metal siding. We're using horizontal kind of galvanized metal siding below the canopies to change up the texture of the building. And we're coming up with some ways to identify each individual tenant. So the goal is to have this building also match the other lot 7 building, the other building like it on lot 7. And we've since ran the calculations in more detail on fenestration. We're meeting the fenestration requirements and actually exceeding them by a good margin on all sides of this building. The other building is, for now, called the Barn because it has that aesthetic. It's also a metal building, red vertical metal siding. The image on the top is the rear of the building. So the business incubator, quote unquote, side where there would be parking and access. You can see the overhead doors and the entry doors, windows upstairs for the residential units. And then the image in the lower left here shows the front side, the residential side, where there's access doors to stairways. Immediately they go up stairways to get to the residential units upstairs. And then there's some windows for the incubators also facing that facade. And then the side of the building that faces Dynamic Drive, you see there to the right. And we've tried to, and Deirdre with Gower and Turgeon has done a nice job to kind of make this building relate well to Dynamic Drive and do a lot of different things. We've also updated the fenestration statistics on this. And it too, I think this space along Dynamic Drive is 55, 60% fenestrated, which when 15's the standard. So we're vastly exceeding the fenestration requirements. And we're pretty excited about this kind of mixed use building in the Innovation District to have kind of that live work environment early into the Innovation District phase. This shows you the residential side of the facade. So I think with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Nancy to talk a little bit more detail on stormwater and some of the other technical aspects, and turn it back to the board. Thanks.
Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Nancy St. Clair of St. Clair Associates, and I'm here basically to follow up on Dan's discussion, specifically regarding lot 6. As Dan in the presentation slides indicated, the site has been designed to coordinate from an access management standpoint with the abutting lot to the east of the site, lot 7 in the Innovation District. So Lot 6, if you recall, a few meetings ago, there was a amendment to the subdivision that actually eliminated Lot 11, which would have been to the south of the original Lot 6, and Lot 6 got bigger, and Lot 29 got bigger, which is the home of the Throttle Car Club. So Lot 6 is about 1.68 acres in size. We are proposing 2 buildings on that lot. The larger building on the lot, Building A, as you see on the screen, is an 18,000 square foot single story building. You recall from the elevations that Dan just showed, that's the incubator space. He's flipping back, there we go. So that's the incubator space. There are 10 units proposed in that, 5 with access on each side. So on the easterly side of the building and on the westerly side of the building, you'll see this elevation. On Building B, which is the 2-story building, the lower level, as Dan mentioned, it does have 4 incubator spaces, very similar internal layout to the one shown in Building A, but the second story of Building B actually has 8 residential apartments. So they vary in size from a studio apartment to a 2-bedroom unit. And those are accessed from the southerly side of the building. So if you're looking at this view, it's the one with a highlight on it. The 2-door locations are the access to stairwells that provide the residents the opportunity to access 4 units on one stairwell, 4 units on the other, and to come up into their living spaces. And as you can see, there are open decks and areas for some of the units on each corner of the building, which provides some nice residential covered open area within their units. Dan, if you could switch to the site plan. Building B, one of the discussions that the staff comments had was, parking and sort of control of that parking, where Building B has the residential use as well as the more commercial use. So we've designed this site such that the access to the residential parking on Building B is on the south side of the building. It's on the side where the access to the residential units are. And we purposely designed it for a number of reasons, but one of which is to keep that more at a pedestrian scale. So that is one of the drive aisles where we've actually requested that that be reduced down to 20 feet. We do have parking all for the residential units in there on that side. There's a sidewalk that runs along the front face of the building, and it allows us to have a nice pedestrian linkage up to the more open areas by the ponds and all to the west of the site. So that location there, as I mentioned, we are proposing 20-foot drive aisle. We are asking for a waiver on that from the typical 25-foot drive aisle. On the sort of northerly end of the site, on the north side of Building B and around the perimeter of Building A, we are also asking for a reduction in drive aisle width. Along the north side, right where Dan has the cursor right now, we're actually asking for that width to be reduced to 22 feet. That's the width to allow a fire truck to safely navigate around the building. But since we don't have any parking off that side, so we don't have vehicles maneuvering, sort of making 90-degree turns, if you will, we have been able to reduce that down to 22 feet with a waiver request from you folks. The parking and access on the east and west sides of Building A and the north side of Building B have been designed so that we can provide access to those overhead doors for the incubator spaces. So in those particular areas, we have held that at 24 feet wide, recognizing that we do need to have appropriate space to maneuver around the building. One of the comments that was made, and I do appreciate Angela's introductory remarks with regard to stormwater. As we've noted in our application materials, we do have the need on this particular site to provide some on-site stormwater treatment. It's a relatively small area. The ordinance would allow us to go to 85%, provided that if anything over 80% of impervious cover on the lot is treated on site. We've accommodated that. We're at 84.6% of our impervious cover. And we've treated that with a bioretention cell that's shown on the southerly side of Building A. We do appreciate the recommendation and the request to really try to consider reduction of impervious area. And as I mentioned, we're asking for those waivers and those drive aisles to try to just facilitate that. But we're at a point where we want to maximize the opportunity for vehicles to safely maneuver in and out of those overhead doors. So we're at the point where we feel we're at an appropriate balance between making sure we have the safely maneuvering area for vehicles coming in and out of the north side of Building B and the east and west sides of Building A, while balancing the need to reduce the amount of impervious cover. So we are respectfully requesting those waivers on those drive aisle widths to accommodate that. We are providing enough parking on the site to meet the ordinance requirements for 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet for the incubator spaces themselves. And then we're also providing the appropriate ordinance required parking for the residential units on the 2nd story of Building B. So with that, we are at the ordinance minimums for parking. But I know one of the comments was to provide the actual table on the plan. We do have it in the application materials, but we will provide that on the plan in response to staff comments. But we are meeting the spaces at 65 parking spaces total provided on the site. So with that, I will turn it back to Dan and see if he has anything more he'd like to add, and then back to you folks on the board.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I guess the only comments I'd like to make before the chair discussion is we're really pretty excited about this layout and about this program for the Innovation District. We've worked quite hard to kind of maximize building area and minimize impervious area. And Nancy's come up with a good strategy around stormwater as allowed through the ordinance and through the subdivision approvals and DEP permit. So we think it's a great fit for the site. We've learned from our initial review with the board and I think responded to board comments well in terms of this design layout. And so this is since it has residential units, it does require a subdivision as well as a site plan for Building B. So it is a two meeting board review. So we respectfully, this evening request a preliminary approval for this because it needs that step for the subdivision component. And then we can make updates, as necessary with board feedback and return to you with a final subdivision. So it is both a site plan and a subdivision. And Nancy's working on that subdivision, kind of final subdivision piece that'll come back to you. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan. We have an opportunity tonight for public comment. If there's anyone here that wants to speak on the item in front of us, please use the raise my hand feature in the lower right-hand corner of your Zoom. Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and turn it over to the board. I'll just start by saying I appreciate the efforts from the applicant based off of what we had seen previously. I think you've come up with a good design for the lots, and I know one of the big question marks for us has always been, how does it interact with lot 7, especially as we get to the end of the property. So I do appreciate the efforts that you've made there, and I think there are improvements. I think the architecture is nice. Personally, I'm okay with the waiver requests. I think they're reasonable. The less buffering, I appreciate the explanation on the stormwater pond side. I think that's, if you already have a nice natural feature in place, I think taking advantage of it is a good move. That's probably the bulk of my comments at this moment in time. I'll let my other planning board members weigh in. As far as the sidewalks, I'm gonna kind of reserve my final thoughts on that. I know you have the bike path and the dedicated striped areas, which I think, if you could appreciate our perspective, were kind of, a good idea when we figured this was going to be largely commercial properties, but now with the addition of residential, I'll just gonna have to reserve final thoughts on that piece of it. See where rest of the board discussion comes, and as well as some maybe thoughts of their own that might help me figure out where I land on that. So with that, I will pass it off to Rachel. Do you want to go?
Yes, now that I'm unmuted. Yeah, I think the location, I know, you know, lot 7 is coming up shortly. But the configuration of the site, the way you've got the 2 incubator buildings is in a sense part of a coherent development rather than, well, we've got Zoom and we don't know what's next or how that's going to work. So I think that's it's a very good way to approach it. I guess I've got a couple of questions and comments. First of all, the barn, I like the concept there. We've talked a lot about work living space. Is it the intent, I guess I would want to know, is the intent to really have the tenants who are living, residents of the barn, are they going to be people who also are renting the incubator space? Is that the intent, or are they going to be working elsewhere in the innovation district, or just a family that says, hey, this is close to trails and I kind of like this? What's your intent there?
The intent is not to require or tie the residential units to the incubator units or other end users in the project. There's certainly the hope and the opportunity that there is some living and working within the project, but it would be tricky and probably unworkable to tie them together.
Okay, I've seen developments that do and developments that don't. So,
yeah.
And you're right. It probably is a little tricky. I guess as I start to think about families being in that building, in the barn, I start to think about children being there as well. And as soon as you start to think that there are going to be children there, you do start to think about sidewalks, you think about benches, you think about play areas immediately adjacent to the building and not far down the street. So that's a concern I have. If you had a whole bunch of 1-bedroom and studio apartments, that might not be a concern, but you do have a couple of 2 bedrooms there, and I can see families moving in. The landscaping, I think what I read is that basically it's a wetland mix, a couple of trees and a wetland mix. And that doesn't really allow a play area for children. So I would like to see some consideration given to the concept that half of that building is a family building. Now, building A and the building that's going to be next to it, let me say I'm going to have the same comment for both of them, and that is I am not as thrilled by the architecture as Nick was. I like the barn. I think the concept of the red, the architecture, it is like a barn. It is like New England. It's distinctive. I think it works. I think the in-cube is stark. I don't know if those are the colors that you are contemplating, but the term I would use would be grim. So I really think you need to take a look at that building, and it just can't be as stark as it is, because the innovation district is modern, but the buildings that you have in there so far may be modern, but they're not cubicle. They're not just a long metal building, and that's all I can see every time I look at that. And to me, that's a problem. I do like the concept of the immediate access, of very close access to the trails. I think that's a plus for anybody who both would live in the barn and for people who work in those warehouse areas. I think it allows people to go out and to walk around. At the same time, I don't see a good gathering place. And the idea of incubator areas really is to also promote conversations and to promote one company saying, well, I make this, what do you make? And finding a like company or something that provides synergy to what the company A is developing. And there appears to be no external place for people to do that, for people to meet. One thing that I notice is that it doesn't look as though you're going to be going after any food processing groups. Is that correct?
In terms of what? Sewer
Well,
connection
in other words,
and
there's no
floor
there's no
drains?
Floor drains, it doesn't look
Right.
as though there's any thought about doing food production in those areas, the incubator.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Okay. That's too bad.
At least in terms of the floor drain component.
Well, I'm saying that really is too bad. I think I know some people, mostly women, who are developing products in their homes and selling them, and starting to move towards larger production. And this sort of an incubator area would be wonderful for that sort of customer. But the way this is set up, it really does seem to be more of the industrial and I guess more of the hardcore industrial rather than something like food processing. I don't know if you've received any applications for that up and coming marijuana grow site area, but is that a potential client as well?
We don't have any specific end users identified at this point. We are designing this to be obviously flexible spaces for what's allowed in the ordinance. So we don't. This isn't being designed for specific end users.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a handle on what you're thinking in terms of the people who are going to be interested in going in there. Because when you use the term incubator, you're really talking about businesses that are starting off, they're moving out of their garage, they're moving out of a small area, they aren't ready for their own building yet, for their own purchase building, but they are ready for the next step up in terms of the growth of their business. And I hope that those are the people really that you're looking at, the people who are going to end up growing in Scarborough and using these buildings as an opportunity for that growth, and ultimately looking to buy their own place, maybe in the Innovation District. But it's small entrepreneurs who are on their way up, and I hope that's the sort of clients that you can find there. That to me is the sort of clients that Scarborough needs.
Yeah, that's exactly who we're envisioning. In these in-between businesses, as you described, they're moving out of their homes in smaller spaces, but not ready for their own site or their own building, where 1,000 to 2,500 square feet is the perfect size to grow their business and run their operation.
Good. I think, again, I think you might want to take a look around and explore the food industry, especially with those areas that have started off as a cottage industry and are ready to move. I know a couple of people that might be interested. I don't know if they're ready to move up, but they certainly are very entrepreneurial.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from them, and we can adapt design based on end users. So we're trying to make this space quite flexible. So
very good. Once tomorrow is done, I'll have some conversations with some friends. Again, I think I think the concept is exciting. I like the idea of the live work space. I like the design of the apartments. Even the studio apartments are well laid out for single folks who want to find a good apartment and settle down for a while. So I like this very much. I like the idea of sidewalks. We know that. I'm not sure about the rest of the waivers. I would have to take a look at my notes. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel. Roger?
Off we go.
Sure. First, I think this is a very imaginative design, especially in conjunction with Lot 7. I would never have thought of putting apartments in this particular area, so that's going to be kind of interesting to see how that develops. I don't foresee families moving into these apartments, especially with children. I just don't see that as a viable option for them in an industrial area. So I'm not concerned about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that quickly. These units are being designed for, not for families. And we're finding in units this size in most of their apartment complexes that families aren't attracted to these size units, these floor plans. And that's really the intent around the design.
Sure. I do like the designs of the buildings. I think they're very creative. And I like the color scheme and everything. I think it sort of goes along with the other buildings that are being developed in this location. So I have no problem with the design of the buildings. I basically am very pleased with everything that's been said so far regarding this particular project, as well as its the sister project, Lot 7. So, and I have no problem at this point with the waivers. So that's all I have to add.
Thanks, Roger.
Mr. McGee?
Yes.
If I may, just real briefly, I think it's just worth mentioning that as a reminder, within the Innovation District, one of the provisions that was approved when these sort of innovative uses, sort of light industrial uses were allowed in this area was the fact that actually our design standards don't apply to buildings in this area. However, there are requirements for certain fenestration along the buildings, along certain frontages, the secondary and primary frontages. So I just want to sort of remind board members and the applicant and those watching sort of what the applicable standards are in this district, which are different than a lot of our other commercial districts. So.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks for the time.
Jen.
Okay. I don't have a problem with either of the waivers as requested. I do also happen to like both of these architecture approaches, but I'm curious about they both seem very different to me from each other. And so for two buildings located so closely and obviously designed to share certain other elements of the site, I'm just curious about why there isn't more sort of cohesiveness maybe between the approaches to architecture on the two buildings.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So we talked about that early on as we were doing the design of the buildings, and the more we looked at it, it seemed pretty forced based on the different architectural forms of the building to try to make the barn black or the building red, or to to integrate them or coordinate them in that way. And we thought it would be actually more eclectic if they didn't match, and we didn't, and we thought it would be more kind of natural in terms of just because building A is on the same side as building B and vice versa, they don't need to match, and it could be more real if they didn't. And they're doing different things, and they're appealing to different end users or residents for that matter. So we talked about it, and we thought that the buildings should be what they want to be and be different and be attractive in their own ways.
Okay, thanks. I did have a couple of other questions, mostly regarding the bike ped elements that were discussed. I did also notice, as Rachel pointed out, a lack of kind of outside person space. I'm not sure how better to phrase that, but some of the suggestions that she made, were things like benches or just, gathering space. And it wouldn't have to be large, but I know that we have included that, or we have asked for that as a board on some other projects, and you have also included that as some of your other proposals as part of this overall development, particularly on projects or sites with residential elements. I'm curious about, I do really like the siting and the location of the residential units in this barn as they are proximate to the trail network and the pathway that's shown in the back here, but I didn't see anything on the plans that provided any type of actual connection to those, which it could just be early, but I do think that would be an easy way to really strongly incorporate either of those elements, and I apologize if you have that and I missed it.
I can speak to that now, or I can hold back. Okay.
Sure.
One of the tricks with designing these sites is there's elements that are on the site responsible of the applicant, and then there's these other components that are happening with the subdivision. If you can see the cursor, okay. Building B has a sidewalk along the residential side of it to provide access to the building. It also comes out to the left here, and it ends here so that it ties into the pathway that's on top of, quote unquote, the stormwater pipe. So there is a path that'll be connecting to, if I jump to this image here, that's that orange yellow line here, that's going to lead up and connect into the trail system that goes around the pond. So we've been trying to be pretty deliberate about providing that linkage across the residential part of the site there. And we are planning on doing, some striping type approach for the incube to do the same linkage, but not wanting to add more kind of separate impervious area, and given sort of the nature of that site, we thought that would be appropriate. So there will be a good linkage for particularly the residents. I've been thinking about doing some type of kind of overlook or gathering place at this intersection of the trail, kind of closer to the pond, which we thought would be more comfortable than maybe right along the building, kind of out more into the open space. That's in association property, so it's more than just this applicant, but that's something that we want to look at really as a separate component, but that can be used by these folks. So that was our thinking in terms of a gathering place nearby.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I know they're really, it's ideal really that, how close those things are to that one little spot. And so I think it would definitely be a strong amenity for anyone who would look to live there. I also had questions about the proposed winter maintenance of both that pathway and the trails in this area. I can't remember if we've talked about that yet or not. Certainly not for this project, but in general, I mean, and so I was just wondering if you could, if you have a thought for that, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Winter snow removal for trails, is that?
Yeah.
We don't
Well-
have plans for removing, grooming or removing snow on trails at this point, no.
Does that also apply?
Sidewalk.
Right, does that also apply to the pathway where it's stormwater access road or no?
That's a good question. I don't believe there would be winter maintenance of that, but we can check on that.
Okay. So I ask because it kind of helps shape my opinion on whether or not I think sidewalks should be added to dynamic drive. I really like the advisory lane approach on these private drives, given the information that we have been presented with and discussed with you on this, the overall approach to this district in general. The addition of residential units kind of throws in, perhaps a newer element that maybe we didn't necessarily talk about before, but frankly isn't all that surprising to me and maybe to others. However, I think that first of all, I think any infrastructure provided with the intent to serve pedestrians in particular, we just need to really make sure that it's ADA accessible, whether that be for residents here or users of these buildings. I don't think there's a lot of grade here, so usually that's one of the pieces that makes that more challenging. But that's why I ask about the winter maintenance. If, for example, the pathway was intended to be the primary pedestrian connection back down to Innovation Way, having that only be available for our good weather months sort of wouldn't really meet that definition, in my opinion. In which case a sidewalk would probably be more appropriate. But if that is something, an alternative connection like that is something that's agreeable for both initial construction and longer term maintenance, I think that too would be a good amenity here. In this particular case, other legs of these private drives may be different given their different potential end users. Yeah. So I mean, it's sort of a parallel route, and like, who wouldn't want to walk on that path over the the more commercial industrial drive is kind of how I feel about it. And let's see what else. I think other than that, any other questions I have been addressed.
Thanks, Jen. Rick DePerry?
I think Rachel did a good job of covering most of my questions, and I was okay with both waivers, so I don't really have any additional questions.
Thanks, Rick. Rick Munking.
Yeah, I only have two. There was no note in the description, or I didn't see it on the lighting plan about dimming these things, or maybe you can just simply put a note in there that you might will use I know the beacon fixtures have an auto commissioning control system that you could just put as a note that you'll use the site sync to control the dimming and occupancy of the parking lot lights, which are mostly wall packs, which is fine. The other question I have, or the other comment that might need a little consideration, is on the parking. How do you have plans on assigning? It looks like parking spots could butt up against the overhead doors, and in some cases there could be two parking lots that would be affected at the door site. So how are you going to, I guess, assign or control, people that just come in and park where they shouldn't be parking and disrupt a service on an incubator space that may need to get into their overhead door?
So, Rick, I can answer that question. if you look closely at our site plan, we had shown sort of dashed lines in the parking spaces that are along the faces of the building. And those spaces would be allocated as each individual tenant needs. So they would control their own spaces within the leases based on their own needs. If you think about it, some of these units may park a vehicle within the building. Others would be able to manage those spaces on their own. So we wanted to maintain that flexibility. We do recognize that there are spaces that would be in front of an overhead door, but we anticipate that the tenants themselves would manage that.
Okay, that's fine. And yeah, I think the sidewalk issue, I think a little more explanation down the road here on the next round would help on that. But I generally I'm in favor of the aisle width waivers for this particular area. That's all I have.
Did I get everyone on the board?
Not me.
Who did I miss? I'm sorry. It's tough. I have to scroll through these little screens here. Who is that? Is that Robin?
Yeah.
Hi, Robin.
And I just want to pick up on, I guess, staff comment about low impact development. So I'm not seeing a lot of low impact development principles incorporated. I'm wondering if the applicant can speak to the low impact development principles incorporated with the design.
Well, part of the overall plan itself, we had looked quite a bit at ways to sort of minimize the amount of impervious cover that's on the lot. We looked at circulation patterns very specifically in order to make sure that we had areas that were as tight as possible to reduce the amount of impervious cover. We had very little curbing on the site. If you look at sort of that four-way intersection location at the main entrance to the access between buildings A and B, there's curbing at the radii, and the remainder of the site generally is designed to either drain inwardly or sheet towards that bioretention cell. So we're trying to do the best that we can to minimize closed drainage system. Trying to get to outside areas that would allow us to, better collect in the bioretention cell and minimize that closed drainage. So we have done what we can in this particular case. It's a little bit different use. There are other types of uses that would be more amenable to low impact development, but we've done what we feel we can with this particular type of layout and use.
What's your response to Woodard and Kern's comment that they were not able to replicate the bioretention cell minimum area?
We'll provide them with the specific calculations. We put that into a HydroCAD model for the actual contour data in order to be able to provide that. As you know, with a bioretention cell, the surface impoundment area is only 6 inches, so it's a really pretty broad and flat area. And then there is also storage in the media as well that's calculated at a 30% ratio.
Okay, I guess what I'd like to see is a little more, narrative on that to satisfy staff and the MS4 permit requirements the next time we see the project, and I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just jump in, I wanted to follow up a little bit on the discussion about the parking and the allocation of the parking in front of each of these units.
Yes.
I was reminded about the fact that as part of these leases, the maintenance of those spaces, the walkways in front of the buildings, that is the individual tenant's responsibility within each unit. So we just want to make sure that everybody sort of understands there's a sort of a global program, that this is something that's allocated between each tenant, and they'll be monitoring and maintaining their own spaces there.
Thank you. The applicant is asking for a preliminary subdivision approval for this evening. I know there's a lot of loose ends that need to be tied up, but I'm comfortable enough with the proposal as it sits to say that I think they're ready to bring it back to us with some of our comments incorporated and things like that. So with that, I will make a motion to provide preliminary subdivision approval for MRW Development LLC for Lot 6 within the Innovation District. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second. We have discussion. And please hold your hand up for me. So there we go. It's easier for me to see when we get back to the grid format. Any discussion on this? No. All right, I'm going to do roll call. Rachel Hendrickson,
No.
Robin Saunders,
No.
Jennifer Ladd,
No.
Roger Beely,
Yes.
Nick McGee, yes. Rocky, I gotta tell you, you're gonna resubmit, and Dan, resubmit with the changes, please. All right. MRW Development LLC requests a site plan review for Lot 7 within the Innovation District, Assessor's Map U53 Lot 4. Jamel.
All right, I'm going to keep this intro short. This is for Lot 7, which is right next door. We were just talking about in relation to Lot 6. Staff has a lot of the same comments, minus the subdivision requirements. So basically, we had the same comments about the parking lot striping and parking program. We had the same comments about additional landscaping and plantings along the southern and northern property lines to screen the site. And again, we'd like the applicant to, I guess they already described the building design, so they probably don't need to. And I don't know if Angela has anything else to add, but I think it's a pretty similar design, so I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks. So Dan and Nancy, if you could keep the presentation kind of specific to what's different between the lots that we've seen and some of the same issues that we've gone over, we'll appreciate it.
Okay. Can people see the screen and hear my voice?
Yes.
So we talked a lot about this already. Lot 7 across from Lot 6. This image shows just the Lot 7 layout with 6 to the left, obviously. Same building, same program as Jamel introduced. Same approach to stormwater with the bioretention cell, handling any additional stormwater that's allowed for between 80 and 85%, which is allowed in the approval and allowed through our past permits. There's parking as configured, much like the Lot 6. There's, I believe, some additional parking you'll see to the northerly edge of the site. That's really for kind of overflow and et cetera along that, like I said, northerly property line. And we're planning that four-way intersection with Lot 6 and shared access. We're providing for space to coordinate landscaping with Lot 12 along the southerly edge of Lot 7. Our intention is to do something similar to Throttle, where there's landscaping along the property line that's coordinated amongst the two lots. And we can add a note to that effect on the site plan. That's our intent there. And to the north, there's open space and woods right up against the property line. So our intention was not to landscape to the buffer. And to the west, the east, there's 10 feet. And our intention was to, similar to AV Technic, to leave that as that, green space, lawn area, seed mix, so that there's building maintenance that can happen along that edge and not landscape right up against the building. And there's a sidewalk or a walkway connection between the building on Lot 7 and the building on Lot 6. And that's essentially the design. Nancy, I don't know if you have any follow-up comments.
Not too much, Dan. Just to follow up and reiterate the fact that this is an 18,000 square foot building. It's the identical size and detail building to the one that's on lot 6 is building A. And we have, in this particular layout, we have access to the overhead doors on the north and the south side of the building. We do have a bioretention cell on the west side of the building that's designed to treat the impervious cover that is in excess of the 80% threshold for the lot. Other than that, I think, Dan, you've covered it. We've talked a lot about sort of the building and circulation when we discussed lot 6, and this is a very similar approach to the layout.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm gonna just open up for board if they have any other follow-up questions on this item. And then please just keep your hand up for me so I can kind of scroll through and see. Rachel.
Yeah, I noticed that one of the buildings, that both of the buildings are named Incube 01. Is one building going to, the signage going to be Incube 01 and the other one Incube 02, or are they going to create confusion?
Yeah, we're not trying to create confusion. That's a good catch. We're still working with public safety on the naming of the building. We're interested in that name. We need to review it. And they would have different numbers or letters associated with them, so there isn't confusion.
Okay. I continue to say that the building is grim, and to urge you to come back with some softening of the building or the colors. I think the additional landscaping that the staff is recommending would start to help, although it's not particularly near the building, but landscaping will frequently create some softening of what's very austere lines. So I urge you to look at the staff recommendations for additional landscaping and buffering. And I urge you again to rethink at least the colors or the just something to get away from what really kind of looks like a prison. So I'd appreciate if you would do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. I have other board members that have anything to offer on this set of plans. Just keep your hand up for me. Jen.
I do just, it concerns me a little bit that our peer reviewer wasn't able to replicate the calculations for kind of the core part of the stormwater treatment for the site and the other one. And I'm sure, it's hopefully with a little bit additional information that's possible to just double check. But I only bring it up because it does seem to be, this isn't a site with a lot of additional green space for which we could sort of tweak that approach somewhere else. It does seem like the designs sort of heavily rely on the biofiltration cells at the edges of the building as a core piece of the low impact development. So I just wanted to mention that also. But other than that, I don't have any other additional comments beyond those from the prior site.
Thanks, Jen. Anyone else on the board? All right. I think you're running into these very similar issues here, so I'm gonna save us the motion on this one and ask that you resubmit both plans to us with the incorporated comments from staff and planning board, and hopefully we can get you in at next 3 weeks from now. All right. Okay, thank you. Number 11, Hayloft Apartments LLC requests a preliminary site plan and subdivision review for Lot 3, the Town Center residential neighborhood within the Downs, Assessors Map R52, Lot 4. Jamel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is also within the Downs redevelopment project in the Crossroad Plains Development District, located on Lot 3 of the Town Center residential neighborhood subdivision. So the applicant's proposing to construct 4 nearly 3,600 square foot, 12-unit residential apartment buildings and 1 approximately 4,400 square foot building consisting of 10 residential apartment units and nearly 1,800 square feet of office space on the first floor. Staff has noted that the site plan review standards do require any driveway access to be separated from any other driveway by at least 90 feet for a street posted at 25 miles per hour. And it's recommended that the applicant consider mirroring the proposed northerly access to the site for the southern access instead of the 2 proposed driveways from Hayloft Lane. Staff has also recommended that the applicant provide additional seating areas adjacent to the building's entrances facing Scarborough Downs Road in the multi-use path located to the east of buildings 2 and 4, given the amount of residents that'll be living within these buildings. Another staff comment was the location of the dumpster enclosure, located directly adjacent to Hackamore Avenue, a future public street, and has recommended the applicant relocate this further into the interior of the site to ensure it's adequately set back as required by the site plan review standards. And finally, staff has noted that the proposed materials and colors of the buildings will need to be included on the elevations with future submissions. The applicant did not provide these on the building elevations and should be prepared to discuss the proposed building design and interior functionality with the board. And I think at this point, Jay would like to discuss the relationship between on and off-street parking as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamil. Yeah, just one thing I want to just raise and really sort of a matter of lessons learned as we continue to go through the different phases. One of the proposals with this project is to incorporate some of the on-street parking to meet the parking requirements of our zoning, which is permissible in the zoning ordinance and is allowable. But just one of the things we need to be mindful of as we move forward, really more so sort of a long-term thinking, is about providing for parking when the inevitable snowstorm comes along and there's a snow ban. I think, in the short term, clearly there's a fairly large parking lot or area not too far from this residential area. But as the totality of the site builds out, just really thinking about securing either, public parking areas, if that's going to be incorporated into the town center area, or potentially looking at, creating easements on other private properties or parking lots that might allow for residents to park, again, when there's a need for emergency operations, again, such as snow storage. So really, this is more mentioning this now as planting the seed for sort of long-term considerations. Because as I said, I think we all recognize right now there's lots of areas where folks can go, but in time, those will hopefully be developed and we'll have a fully articulated site at some point. So just sort of make mention, that's all I had for right now. Happy to answer questions on that as needed.
Thanks, Jay, appreciate it. Dan.
Thank you. I put the presentation up on the screen. Hopefully everybody can see it. And again, I apologize not for being video available. So this is the site known as Lot 3 in the town center residential area that was approved a few meetings ago. This image shows the overall. And Lot 3 is, if you can see my cursor in this area here, labeled Hayloft Apartments. So it's in the northerly part of the town center subdivision area. It's been designed kind of very deliberately to be compatible with the lots around it, to share access, to reduce curb cuts. The access points are already approved on the public streets, to provide fire connections. This is a bird's eye that shows kind of the aesthetic and the pattern that will be created by the site plan and its relationship to the houses around it that we think is a very fitting design here, where there's interconnections for fire department in particular, with the adjacent private alleys. There's 2 buildings that front the Downs Road, and 3 that have views in front the park, and the bike path. So I thought that was a useful plan to show how the site plan kind of lays in and the project lays in with what's already been approved around it. This is our site plan that's in your package. And as I indicated, there's 5 buildings proposed. 4 are the same in terms of their size and their unit mix, with 5 2-bedroom units and 7 1-bedroom apartment units. They're the 3 along the right side of the screen and the one on the lower end along the Downs Road. The other building is proposed to have some light commercial space on the first floor, and that was something the board encouraged through the master plan process. We took a very hard look at it, and are interested in moving forward with some office space there to start with, and think it can be a nice asset to this phase. And in the future, maybe it transitions to other uses as people live here and there's more activity. So we're citing that space right on the corner. We anticipate, kind of to Jay's comment to a degree, the on-street parking here in large part to be used more for the commercial use, which wouldn't necessarily be overnight, is very customary in settings like this. So we think that could work well and minimize concerns about, overnight parking. And to address the overnight parking issue, we're certainly open to long-term ideas on shared parking in places that will have, office space within the project that won't have cars overnight during a storm event to deal with that. In terms of kind of getting into staff comments and the details, well, let me keep going on. Sorry. Landscaping, and I'll come back to that. So this is our landscaping plan for the project. We've tried hard to have a good landscaping edge both on the Downs Road and on the park side, and have a really healthy landscaped area in the parking lot that's really predicated on the layout of the parking lot. And I'll come back to that. But we like the idea, given the size of the parking lot, to have a wider landscaped island down the middle, provide some separation between the parking areas and the buildings. We've also focused on landscaping along the sidewalk coming in from the Downs Road below 4 of the units. That's going to provide a connection out to the multi-use path in the park. So that's at a high level our landscaping plan. In terms of the elevations, this is the design for 4 of the 5 buildings, the one in the upper left. We're planning on a blue building, blue siding, and architecture somewhat similar to Tandem Court, the condominiums, but with some different details, different color scheme to differentiate. And we're pretty happy with the layout and the aesthetic of the building. I think it would work well near single family homes. The building to the right is similar color scheme, but we're accenting the commercial space so that it's clear that it's different. It's not a residential unit. There's going to be kind of more windows, more of a storefront aesthetic, and visitors will be drawn to the commercial space and not the residential entrances. And I guess I should have mentioned, to just clarify, essentially all the utility, stormwater, all of those components are dealt with through subdivision. So those are all approved with your past approval. This is tying in, new catch basins, running new private water and sewer lines. But in terms of the overall infrastructure, it's as expected and tying into the system already approved. Drew's on the call to comment on that if there are questions from the board. I guess in terms of a couple staff comments that we'd like to discuss, this one came up where, this private access way, it's expected there's separation between these drive aisles. This access way is part of the site. It's the site's access drive, like driving into a typical parking lot. So we didn't expect it to need to meet separation between these two driveways. We did that pretty deliberatively to enable this layout, to enable the landscaping pattern, to enable good circulation in the project. It's tying into the access drive that otherwise only serves 3 houses and some garages along it. So we didn't think it would need to meet that standard. If it does, then we'd ask for a waiver. We think this is safe and it will operate just fine like a typical apartment complex. And it's good. It's got good controls in terms of access and circulation, in our opinion. The trash area, the dumpster location has been a tricky one in this layout. I guess it's sort of the lesser of all evils. We felt it was a good location for a couple of reasons. One being it's close. We put it next to the commercial space on purpose. We thought that would be least sort of impactful rather than being next to a residential unit. It has good access for, the hauler to get into that location. It's probably the best access point within the layout. So I think one thing we can do is improve screening. We want it to look good from Hackamore as well. So we could work on, that aspect of it. If there are other ideas on where it goes, and we're interested in those. This seemed like all things considered a pretty good location, and then we could overcome it with screening if that's a concern. And other than that, we're certainly okay with adding some benches where appropriate. We've done that with other lots. And of course, there's a fair amount of sitting areas in our open spaces along our paths. So we can do it. We want to do it in a deliberate way. So we're not, sort of doing too many benches, but we're happy to kind of work with staff on where that makes sense. And I think those are kind of the key points that staff brought up. But if I've forgotten one, we can talk about it when the board has their discussion.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. We have an opportunity tonight for public comment on this item. If you were here and wish to speak on this, please use the raise my hand feature on the bottom right portion of your screen. All right, seeing that, I'm going to close public comment, turn over to the board. I'll just start. I think the architecture, the layout, I think it's a really nice, I think it's really nice. I think it fits in well with what you've designed for that residential portion of the property. As far as the topics and areas of concern, the driveway separation, I don't view that. I think I'm probably lean towards more Dan's explanation, which is a view more of like a parking aisle entrance and exit. I understand that staff has some concerns about the distancing there, but I think the layout does make some sense if you live on one side of the buildings versus the other, the ability to enter and exit from different sides. So I'm okay with the way it's laid out currently. As far as the on-street parking, is that something that can be remedied with just a no overnight parking sign? Is that?
So yeah, if I could try to answer that question, if this is a good time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't think it generally, it's not an issue. Again, I'm just sort of flagging that if when there is a, the current policy for the town is when there's a parking ban, there's no on-street parking. So I think, allowing for overnight parking is viable. Actually, there's language that council is approving that allows for overnight parking in designated on-street, I should say, parking spaces, really for, as we're starting to see projects such as Eastern Village and Dunstan Crossing and the Downs, sort of come along, and our zoning is sort of catching, or I should say, development is catching up with sort of what some of the provisions allow in our zoning. And so I think in terms of sort of the governance of the on-street parking, it's to be consistent. The town does have I can't remember what the ordinance is called, but an ordinance that discusses what's allowed for on-street parking. And so rather than the board trying to sort of make different conditions for different developments, which becomes very confusing and difficult for the police department, who ultimately needs to control those things to track. So I think maybe in a roundabout way of answering your question, I don't know that it's really for the purposes of the board's review. I think the question is, have they satisfied the design for on-street parking? And does that on-street parking satisfy the zoning requirements as allowed in the Crossroads district? The governance and usage of that, in those emergency situations, I think is governed elsewhere in the community. If that is a satisfactory answer.
We're pleased to figure out a solution in terms of storm events and solving that on site for sure.
All right. So that was that was pretty much the extent of the comments I had here. As far as the dumpster, I mean, probably not the greatest location, being right up on the roadway. However, I'm not opposed to possibly a pretty robust buffering either. So I'll defer to some of the sentiments of the board, but it's got to be one or the other: incredibly robust buffering, or try to find another spot for that somewhere on that site. With that, I'll just see who wants to go next. Just raise your hand. Jennifer.
Okay, just to elaborate on trash for a minute, I just, glancing quickly at that site, I sort of agree. There's kind of like no great place that lends itself to like, oh yeah, trash should go over here. And so I do think that, either a relocation or enhanced buffering there is a good idea. I also think it's a good idea to locate it in a place closest to the commercial use. Because I think you probably stand a higher likelihood of getting that business to take care of their trash appropriately, and also in a place that is easiest for pickup. Ultimately emptying the dumpster probably will get it done more often and with less damage and interruption to the rest of the parking lot. So that's how I feel about trash. I have questions about parking. First of all, I noticed in the parking table, you tally up, it's like 113 spaces, I think, total, but there's a separate line for the 5 accessible spaces. I just wanted to clarify whether or not it looks to me like those are intended to be excluded from the 113.
I'm going to have Drew speak to that, if you would, Drew.
Yeah, no problem. Drew Gagnon with Goral Palmer here. Those are included in the count for the 113.
Okay.
Specifically list them out for the information.
Okay, great. And is there a plan to provide any type of any parking spaces in the rear parking lot for the commercial use, whether it be for patrons or employees or anything like that? Or is the thought that those businesses or business would exclusively use the on-street parking?
No, I can answer that. We intend to have some off-street parking as well. It really focused, I guess to your point, Jen, around the dumpster, so that if you look at the site plan, that vicinity of the site we thought would be most conducive to non-residential parking, in addition to the on-street.
Okay, great. Because my thought was that that could potentially help. I don't know how you're planning to identify those or over what periods of time or something, but if it was, that could potentially be a way to offset on-street parking if you needed to relocate those in the event of a storm or street cleaning or whatever like that. And wanted to make sure that it appears this way, but it looks like none of the on-street parking spaces are intended to be accessible, but there is an accessible space to the rear of the building with a commercial use. Is it reasonable to expect that access from the back would allow someone that needed it to park in the back and access the business?
Yes. Yeah.
Without having to go around. Okay. And then I think the only other question I had was just about kind of this phase in general. I'm just a little curious about how you arrived at the mix here of commercial and residential. So for example, why not? It looks like maybe one ground level unit was reserved in that front corner building for residential, as you weren't carrying across the same aesthetic and architecture for the whole bottom floor of that building. And why not include commercial space, say on the other building on the Downs Road?
I can address that. Rocky here. That building, half of the first floor is intended to be commercial use, and that really is for selfish reasons. It's likely going to house Downs-related business. M&R Holdings, Crossroads Holdings, gives us a place on site. And then our thought is that eventually evolves into very likely on-site management for the Downs. I do want to touch on, I'll segue into, we're talking about parking. We own Main Properties. Main Properties is a professional management company. Every time it snows, one of our property, our procedure on all of our properties, our managers are on site in the morning with the snowplow crew. Every single car is removed from the site. Now, one thing we are blessed with and cursed with at the Downs is we have plenty of parking. So we're managing to find places for those cars. We come in, move all the snow, everything gets cleaned out, and then the cars can go back. In the future, as the Downs develops out, that parking is going to transform, but we're still going to have a lot of parking at the Downs that isn't fully parked 24/7. So, you know, it's professional management and it's a juggling process, but it's something that we've managed and will continue to manage over time. Thank you.
Thanks. That's all I had.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Other board members? Rachel.
Yeah, let me again compliment you on the architecture. I like the way you've distinguished the commercial from the residential. When we looked at the original plan of the master plan for the Downs, this area had the potential for more commercial. And I'm glad to see that one building that's commercial. I'm disappointed that there's not more. That there's not commercial in the ground floor of building number 3, I think it is. But it's a start. And I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see the start happening. Are the other buildings going to be the same colors? They're all going to be whether the front or back, they're all going to be the blue with the white trim. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And I might, if I could just add, those are known colors. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but we know what the product is and what the color is. And I thought that was submitted to staff. And I apologize for not knowing what it is off the top of my head, but I believe that those are real colors, known, and have
Yeah.
been submitted.
Correct.
Right, it's tough. They could be real colors, but everybody's monitor is going to express them a little differently.
Right.
So I liked what I saw on my monitor. Let me put it that way.
It's that color.
And then, who knows what the real color is going to be. Yeah, I do think as I look at building 5, or the difference between the spaces in between building, I think it's 4 and 5, that there is an opportunity there for some placemaking. There's some extra space where some benches could go. So I urge you to take a look at that. I'm a little confused on the back of the buildings, the 3 in the rear. Now, you said that those back on what?
Yeah, those face, I don't know if my screen is still up or not, but those face the park, the path, and the gravel wetland area. So they face right onto a walking path and then that park space.
Right, so it's not gonna, I wasn't clear whether there was a road there, gonna be a road, or whether it was just the park area.
Yeah, it's a bike path. It also will be serving as a fire lane. We work with the fire department on the design of that, so that's an emergency route for them in the case that they need to use it.
Well,
It's
then
gonna be a
certainly
bike path.
benches in the rear there of those buildings, excuse me while I'm trying to juggle, lots strips of paper here. Benches to the rear of those buildings facing the wet area, the wetland area, the pond and the trail would be very appropriate. And for the tenants to go out and sit and just simply contemplate the whole natural area. So I think you have the opportunity to put benches in those areas. And I think I had a question about the on-street parking, but I guess what I would have to actually ask is when you're coming, visitors to the commercial area could be, or staff could be directed into the parking lot at the back, and you might want to consider saying, these areas, parking areas right next to the dumpster are reserved for business X between, until 5 o'clock, something like that. And that would ensure that your clients have space to park. And at the same time that when business is over and the tenants come, if they have guests, they have extra space for them to park as well. So I think you could take a look at doing something like that. And that's all the questions I have. Yeah.
If I could just interject, all the on-site parking will be assigned.
Okay.
It's part of our policy.
All right. For the, but is it a possibility that the commercial parking spaces are free after a certain time for guests? Yeah, I mean, I think that would be helpful. So that during business hours, you've got the space, but afterwards, when family comes or there's a party someplace, they know that they can park there safely.
After hours, yes. Makes sense.
After hours. Okay, very good. All right, that's it.
Thanks, Rachel. Just a quick announcement for those that have been waiting on the agenda. We don't take up new business after 10 p.m. So this will be the last item for the evening. And then I'll turn it back over. Is there any other board members that want to weigh in? Roger?
Yes. Clarification, if I could, from the staff regarding the pedestrian ways. They recommended including a sidewalk between buildings 1 and 3 and buildings 4 and 5. Is the recommendation to provide a sidewalk through the parking lot I don't quite understand what you're recommending there.
No, the recommendation was to essentially connect existing sidewalks between the two buildings, not through the parking lot.
So connect buildings 1 and 3?
Yeah, so there's a sidewalk along Scarborough Downs Road. There's a sidewalk along the parking lot. So it was just a suggestion to provide a direct connection that will probably be used by pedestrians either way.
Okay, I guess I don't understand where that sidewalk would go then.
Okay. I don't know if we want to.
Are you talking about right between the buildings?
Correct.
Okay.
I can speak to that if,
Pardon me?
board like.
Go on.
I just want to remind the board that the design of these buildings, which are different from other 12-unit buildings, multifamily buildings, is that there's a common hallway that connects the front of the building to the rear. So residents can walk through the buildings from front to back, which is nice for a variety of reasons. It's also including kind of getting from the front of the site to the back of the site, et cetera. And then we've provided walkways for the general public or people that aren't residents, that don't have access to the buildings on both sides of 2 sets of the building. So our thinking is that that's a lot of opportunities to move around, and the first floor units in most of these buildings have outdoor space that's private, so that's the kind of their private area. There's balconies up above. And so we'd prefer that to be more kind of private space for residents who are renting, and then the public space be on the perimeters, those walkways.
Okay. I have a question pertaining to the parking areas where the mailbox units are located. When I saw that, I was thinking of what I witnessed when I was down in Florida recently. They have a cluster of mailboxes, and they have an area similar to this, but they actually have an area where the residents actually drive right up, almost like on the sidewalk. So when there's inclement weather, they don't literally have to get out of their vehicle. They can just drive right up practically, and if they can, reach into the mail, open up their mailbox. But this is going to be more designed for around people just to pull up and park and get out and get the mail. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And it's parking that's only for that activity. It's not parking that people would use for on-street parking.
Sure. Okay.
We're hoping also that a lot of residents walk to the mailbox too, so it doesn't get too congested. It's a very walkable layout. So we think there'll be some people using that pull off, and then some people walking out from the path to get their mail.
Yeah, they could get their mail when they take their trash, both in the same complex. And just an observation. Can I assume that all the streets, whether they're private or public, if they're private, they all end with lane? Is that how you're working it out?
No.
I noticed Daisy Cutter Lane and Loft Lane, where Hackamore is an avenue.
Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, often the private alleys lane is a very common name for an alley or a lesser drive. So we've been trying to use lane to distinguish. And then obviously the Scarborough Downs Road and Hackamore Ave, those are the public streets,
okay.
or to be public streets.
I think the architecture on the units look fine, and I think everything else looks pretty good too. I have no problem with the waivers that you're seeking. So, and on that the entranceway there on Loft Lane, I don't have a problem with seeking a waiver on that either. So I'm all set.
Thanks, Roger. Any other board members have anything to add to the discussion on this? Rachel?
All right, I just wanted to note, if it hasn't been noted yet, that you have in the parking area space for a potential EV charging station without our beating at you for it. And I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I hope that gets in there.
Any other board comments on this item? Rick Manking.
Yeah, well, she just stole my thunder. I was going to thank them, but now I can't. But I'll reiterate that. No, I like this. I'm hoping that to be consistent with sustainability and the state's goals of carbon neutrality and things like that, we might consider something other than a gas-fired hydronic system. It looks like you might be able to provide chases within the construction and look at a variable refrigerant flow system that'll provide heating and cooling, which I think would be a nice amenity, and we wouldn't have shaker units sticking out of the windows. And it would be a wonderful addition to the Downs. I'll say my solar speech, you know, it's another great application for solar, and there's plenty of room to pre-wire or pre-run chases for that as the tax credits remain in effect, and there's funding available for folks that want to do that. I did want to just ask, is there no provisions for any handicap units on the first floor? I didn't see on the floor plans where the bathroom, or at least the circle wasn't in the bathrooms to annotate that, you know, units were handicapped. And I'm just wondering if maybe that was just.
There's space. We can, we're hoping for preliminary approval tonight on this, and before final, we'll get you updated floor plans that clarify that.
Okay. Appreciate that. That's wonderful. I like it. My colleagues have done a great job in narrowing in on some of the staff comments. So I'm all set for tonight.
Thanks, Rick. Any other board comments on this? All right, seeing none, I am going to make a motion to give preliminary site approval for Hayloft Apartments LLC within the Town Center Residential Neighborhood, Assessors Map R52 Lot 4.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I'm going to roll call. Rachel Hendrickson.
Yes.
Roger Beely.
Yes.
Robin Saunders.
Yes.
Jennifer Ladd.
Yes.
Nick McGee. Yes. 5-0. I show that is approved for preliminary. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time this evening. At this point, we are going to table items 12 through 17 because of the hour of night. We will go into 18, which is the staff report.
I do not have any at this time. I don't know about the other staff members.
Administrative amendment report.
None at this time.
Correspondence. No. Planning board comments. Ms. Hendrickson.
I just noticed when I drove by today that the solar field, all of the panels are already up, and I at the mainly tubs, and I assume that they're ready to go. So that went up awfully fast, but that was nice.
Doesn't take long to get those things up. And it doesn't cost a lot of money either.
All right. Any other planning board comments? All right. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. All in favor? Aye. Good evening, folks. Thank you very much for your help this evening.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Bye-bye.